Switched by LunarDani. Rapunzel has hated living across the street from Jack for as long as she could remember. But something changes in their senior year. He has changed, and when she discovers a horrible secret about her past, she finds comfort and companionship in the one person she never thought she would. Asterisk deleted, but reposted this story. Asterisk rated M. Jackunzel, Mericcup. Chapter 1. Rapunzel. Ever since Rapunzel could remember, she's hated Jack. She hated the way he smiled. She hated the way he thought he was so hot. She hated everything about him. Well, maybe not hate, but seriously disliked. Jack lived across the street from her, which made it even easier for her to dislike him. They used to be somewhat friends, but that only lasted a day. A very short day. The day she moved in, actually. She moved to Arendelle when she was in the 2nd grade and thought it was going to change her life. It did in a way because it taught her that not everyone is going to be your friend. She remembered the day and how it all happened. Her mom and her were unpacking their small moving truck when Jack and his father came over to introduce themselves. At first, she was intrigued by the boy with the white hair and big blue eyes. He didn't really say hi to her, just waved, and then tried to listen in on Rapunzel's mom and his mom's conversation. Rapunzel was showing him their house when they reached her room. He asked why her room was white, and she told him her mother lets her paint her room, and he told her how stupid that was. Not only that, but he damaged her paints and her easel. It resulted in them having a full-blown yelling match, and their mothers pulling them off of each other. So now, 9 years later and in their junior year, their disliking for each other had only grown. The only reason why they still had to talk and communicate with each other was because their best friends were each other's best friends too. It's not what Rapunzel preferred, but she loved her best friend Merida. And if she was friends with Jack's best friend, she would make that sacrifice for her friend. Rapunzel woke up, their first day of junior year, and was happy that they only had 1 more year of high school, 1 more year of school, 1 more year of getting up this early, 1 more year of living across from that arse. She got up and sat in front of her vanity and brushed out her long blonde hair. She put on mascara quickly and stood up, opening her curtains, and smiled at the sun shining down on her. She learned in 5th grade that her room was literally directly across from Jack's. She could see him getting ready for school. She grimaced at the boy standing in nothing but jeans, fluffing his hair up with gel. She turned and walked towards her closet, flinging it open, her morning already ruined by seeing any sign of that jerk. She tapped her chin and decided what she was going to wear. She grabbed a flowy purple dress that had sleeves that went down to her elbows and pulled some wedges out of her shoe rack. She turned to her stereo and blasted some music to help lift her mood. She danced and sang to Taylor Swift's "We Are Never Getting Back Together." She slipped out of her nightgown and danced around, throwing her dress on and zipping it up in the back with a hanger. She strapped her wedges on and twirled in front of her mirror and smiled at herself. The perfect outfit for a perfect first day. She skipped down the stairs and smiled at her mother as she saw the stack of strawberry pancakes waiting for her. "Yum!" she yelled and sat down, stuffing pancakes in her mouth. "Merida called. She's on her way over here," her mother told her. Rapunzel nodded, focused on eating.
They heard a knock on the door and Merida walked in without anyone even answering. This was like her second home. "Hey, are we all ready for the first day of junior year?" Merida yelled and hugged Rapunzel. "Volume, Merida, volume!" Rapunzel's mother rubbed her temples. "Sorry, Gothel." Merida smiled. "I'm just so pumped. Just 1 more year, girl, and then we will be going to Princeton and beginning our lives."
Rapunzel smiled at her friend's enthusiasm and shook her head slowly. She loved Merida, but sometimes she could just be a tad bit too loud. Her family was a bunch of Scots, and they weren't the quietest of the bunch. To say that Merida was the loudest person at pep rallies was an understatement. "Thanks for breakfast, Mom." She smiled and hugged her mother. "We're gonna go now." Rapunzel grabbed her shoulder bag and walked out with Merida to Rapunzel's car. Rapunzel saved up so long for it, and with help from her mother, she got her dream car. It was a sky blue convertible Beetle. She got in and folded down the top. "I'm so excited for today. Are we gonna stop and pick up Hiccup?" Merida asked. Rapunzel nodded, putting on her sunglasses. "Sure." She started pulling out when she said Jack on his motorcycle, wheeling it down the driveway before revving the engine obnoxiously. Rapunzel growled through her teeth and looked at the white-haired boy. "Rapunzel, relax. He's just leaving, Merida told her friend. She was aware of how much Rapunzel hated Jack, and how much he hated her. She saw how Jack and Rapunzel were eyeing each other down right now. Jack's eyes gleaming through his helmet, and Rapunzel tilting her sunglasses down so she could glare at him. Merida huffed and rolled her eyes. Before Rapunzel could even put her foot on the gas pedal, Jack already sped away, winking at her through his helmet as he did so. Rapunzel huffed and drove the opposite way towards Hiccup's house. Merida's and Jack's best friend. He was starting to become her friend too, but she wasn't as close as the other two. I don't understand why you two even keep this up anymore. Don't you think we are a little too old for this? Merida asked Rapunzel carefully. What? He's the one that keeps it going. He is always trying to irritate me, Rapunzel yelled at her friend. How dare she take his side? Rapunzel, he only does it because he knows how much it pisses you off. What do you think would happen if you didn't react? He would stop, Merida told her. Rapunzel thought over what her friend said and had to admit she had a point. She never tried that before. All right, we'll see. Rapunzel pulled into Hiccup's driveway. 'Bout time! Hiccup came walking out and jumped into the back seat of Rapunzel's car. I've been waiting forever. Oh, stop it! Rapunzel rolled her eyes. We're on time. School doesn't start for another 30 minutes. Yeah, and school is still 20 minutes away, Hiccup reminded her. Then we better stop talking and go. Rapunzel stuck her tongue out and swerved out of the driveway and hit the gas. See, I told you that we would make it on time. Rapunzel smiled victoriously and was about to pull into a parking spot when Jack swerved in front of her, causing her to hit her brakes. Rapunzel glared at him as he pulled in with a girl she recognized as Elsa on the back holding his waist. She smiled as she got off and he followed her, putting an arm around her waist as they walked into the school. Rapunzel, remember what I told you. Merida rubbed Rapunzel's shoulder. Don't let it get to you. Rapunzel swallowed her pride and nodded her head, looking for a new spot. Rapunzel walked into school and felt an arm go around her waist. She looked up and smiled at her boyfriend Flynn, a senior and the star quarterback. He had been gone this summer with his family in California, which to her and their little town in Georgia was a long ways away. Hey, he smiled and kissed her in front of everyone. I've missed you. Your parents are cutting it kind of close getting back yesterday, huh? She smiled as they walked to class. Merida and Hiccup had gone off to do their own thing. She had a sneaking suspicion that they were starting to like each other. So, how was it? Rapunzel smiled at him. Tell me all about it. Flynn shrugged. We didn't do much. Rapunzel looked at him weirdly. You were gone in California for 3 months and all you had to say was you didn't do much? Flynn smiled and ruffled Rapunzel's hair. I've missed you and your smart mouth. She smiled and they arrived at her locker. I have cheerleading after school today, but do you want to hang out afterwards? Well, Anna is throwing a party tonight. First party of the year. Should be good. Want to go? Flynn asked me and wiggled his eyebrows. I shrugged. Not really. I want private time with you, Flynn. I haven't seen you in 3 months for crying out loud. Well, what better way to get acquainted punts? He smirked and ran his along on my side. Knock it off. I wiggled out of his touch. You know I don't want to do that yet. You just said you haven't seen me in 3 months and how you miss me. He laughed and then ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. What better way to treat me than to finally express our love? So, because you've been gone, I have to sleep with you to show you I missed you? She looked at him, hurt etched into her face. Flynn stalled for a moment. Well, no, but I mean damn puns. We have been dating since 8th grade. Don't you think it's time too? No, I want it to be when I really care about someone and I love them, Rapunzel told him. You don't love me? Flynn kept trying. Of course I do. It's just, Flynn, we're in high school. That's a big thing for a girl to do with a guy, she tried to explain. And I want it to be perfect. I don't want it to happen at some friggin' party where anyone can walk in on us. Flynn nodded and smiled. All right, let's get to class. They walked hand in hand down the hallway to their first class, AP Biology. Everyone in the hallway were either saying hi to her or high-fiving Flynn and asking him how his vacation was. Rapunzel looked around at all the faces and felt an emptiness inside her that usually came with being around Flynn. She loved him and her friends, but were they really her friends? Or were they just friends because of the circumstance? The circumstance being they were popular and in high school? She looked at Flynn, who was practically beaming with all the attention being showered on upon him. They were the school's golden couple, and she knew it. She was head cheerleader, and he was the star quarterback. It was so perfect it was almost sickening to her. Sometimes she wished she could just be with Merida and have all of this melt away, and she could just paint and be real, and not have to plaster on a smile at school for Flynn and the people always watching them. Rapunzel choked down all these feelings and just plastered on her best I love my life smile and held on to Flynn's hand a little tighter. Chapter 2. Jack. Jack looked at the golden couple in disgust. How could she be with some so big-headed as him? He thought to himself, looking at Flynn Rider. Even his name sounds stupid. You know, if you keep looking at them, people are going to think you like Rapunzel. Hiccup smiled at his best friend, walking up to him from behind. Jack turned and smiled. I'm in love with Flynn for the last time, Hiccup. I've told you like 10 times. Get your head out of your ass. Hiccup laughed and punched Jack lightly. So, have you irritated that little puffy princess yet? No, Jack smiled. I'm going to wait until class at least. So, what was with you and Elsa today? Hiccup quirked an eyebrow to Jack. I thought you two weren't anything anymore. We're not. Jack rolled his eyes. She keeps trying to call me and get me to hang out with her. She texted me today asking me for a ride 'cause her mom's car broke. I'm not gonna leave her stranded. She's still a friend. Just a friend? Yes! Last thing I need is that psycho coming back into my life. My mom is still cleaning the damage she caused to my house. Jack laughed. Besides, I have too much on my plate right now. Yeah? Hiccup laughed. Like what? Irritate Rapunzel? That's on top, my friend. Jack winked, and Hiccup laughed. He reflected on the morning and smiled to himself at how much he irritated Rapunzel today. She drove him nuts earlier this morning playing her shitty music while she danced around her room. Although he hated her, he had to admit that she looked pretty good in her underwear. Hiccup and Jack reached AP Biology, and Jack groaned inwardly as he saw Rapunzel and Flynn sitting together at a lab table in the front of the class. Rapunzel saw him and instantly latched herself onto Flynn. She was intimidated by him, and he knew it. He had his piercings, and the way he dressed was foreign to her. He liked how the hoop in his lip, his eyebrow ring, and his ear piercings made her uncomfortable. Irritating her was like a drug to him. He was constantly seeking out to piss her off. He hated the girl. He hated everything about her. How she was so perfect. She had all her popular friends, her perfect boyfriend. It was sickening. And he could tell she loved it. She basked in it. He sat at a lab table with Hiccup second row all the way to the right. He leaned on his elbow and just stared at the back of Rapunzel's head, thinking of what to do to piss her off in this class. People were used to him acting up and constantly being a prankster and a trouble starter. An older woman walked in and took her place at her desk. Those who aren't here are getting a detention, so just let be a warning to all of you that if you're late, you will be punished, she warned them. Jack's eyes widened at how strict she was on the first day of school. Usually teachers are sweeter than candy on the first. I can see you took the liberty of picking your partners, but I already assigned you to your partners. She smiled at them. A series of moans and groans could be heard, and her smile widened. She started listing off names, and Jack began to drift off. Flynn Rider, Anna. Jack saw Rapunzel smiled at Flynn and pick up her stuff to get up and move. He noted how it was her who had to get up and not him. Bet he didn't want to give up the front row seat so he could be center of attention, Jack thought to himself bitterly. Jack Frost, Rapunzel Corona, she said, and then continued to list off people. Rapunzel looked at Jack and glared her eyes. Jack glared right back, and Hiccup quickly got up and moved away from them before they started to fight. Jack could hear Rapunzel sigh as she walked over to him and sat down, looking straight forward. All right, now look at your partner and say hi. They are going to be your partner for the rest of the school year. The woman smiled at them. Jack smiled when he saw how big Rapunzel's eyes got, but she didn't even look at him. For those of you who don't know, I'm Mrs. Layton, she said to them. Now, to get better acquainted with your partner, I would like you to spend 10 minutes asking your partner what they like to do, and then you will orally present it to the class what you learned about your... I could think of something that would be more fun, orally. Jack whispered to Rapunzel. He was hoping she would start yelling and telling him how disgusting he was. But he was wrong. She just looked straight forward and remained expressionless. She brought out her notebook and grabbed his. Just write down some things about yourself and I'll do the same. She mumbled to him and started to write things down. He saw her writing furiously. She may act like she's ignoring me, but her body language isn't. He smiled to himself and wrote down one thing. Time's up, Mrs. Layton said. Rapunzel threw Jack's notebook back at him and grabbed hers. She looked at what he wrote and gasped. Tonight, you and me, dinner, dancing, and some hot sex. She glared at him, and he was smiling at her. She looked like she was about to say something, but she turned back to the front of the class. Who would like to go first? Mrs. Layton called out, and Rapunzel was surprised when Jack shot his hand up. Excellent. And you are? Jack. Jack Frost. He smiled. Oh? Another fairy tale name? Well, go ahead. He smiled at Rapunzel and stood up. My partner is Rapunzel Corona. This is my partner Jackson Frost. He likes to punch holes in his face, run a drug ring, and have sex with sluts. When he isn't busy doing that, you can catch him acting like he's tough and knows everything. He also has a secret desire no one knows about. She smiled at him, and he leaned forward, intrigued with what she was saying. Yeah, he was pissed, but he was also surprised at how much guts she had. He wants plastic surgery to become a woman so he can be as beautiful as he is on the inside. Rapunzel smiled at him and sat down. Jack snickered and stood up before Mrs. Layton could say anything else. This is my partner, Rapunzel Corona. She spent the summer shopping at the mall, gossiping with her friends, and spending her mother's money. When she wasn't doing that, she was busy stuffing her bra to help her out with some of assets, if you know what I mean. He sat down and smiled at her. She was about to yell at him, but Mrs. Layton yelled at them. We're starting off the year like that, are we? She snapped at them. I will see you two after class. I smiled over at Rapunzel as her face turned red. I bet she never gets asked to stay after class. He rolled his eyes and looked back at Mrs. Layton. Do you two have a problem with how I run my class? She asked the two of them after everyone else left. No. Jack said at the same time Rapunzel said, Yes. You two are going to have to get along together. You are almost seniors. This is ridiculous. Because of your actions, you can either have detention or write a 2-paged essay, single-spaced about teamwork and why it is important, she told them, holding out 2 pink slips and 2 notebooks. Jack reached for the pink slip as Rapunzel reached for the notebook. Figures. He rolled his eyes. Paper is due tomorrow, Miss Corona and Mr. Frost. I will see you after school today, she told them. You are dismissed. They walked out and Rapunzel huffed as she walked to her locker. She could feel Jack following her, and she turned her head. Why are you following me? She yelled at him. Jack smiled and sauntered closer to her. We're almost adults now, Poons. Maybe we should bury the hatchet. He smiled coyly at her. Yeah, I'd be digging the grave while you aimed the hatchet at my back. She turned to face him and took a step back when he realized how close he was to her. We're neighbors. Be neighborly to me and go out with me tonight. He grinned wickedly at her. In your dreams. She rolled her eyes. She has someone to take her out tonight, Frost. Flynn came up behind Rapunzel and wrapped his arm around. Why don't you go and get lost? Oh, big macho man coming to save her? I've known her longer than you will even date her. Jack snickered. I love this girl. Flynn squeezed Rapunzel and Rapunzel wiggled uncomfortably in his grasp. You love her for her body. Jack took a step forward and glared at him. He saw Rapunzel's face fall as she heard what Jack said. She thinks so too, he thought. You two aren't worth my time. See you tonight, Punzy. Jack left them and walked away with a smile on his face. Mission to annoy Rapunzel. Complete. Chapter 3. Rapunzel. All right, ready? Rapunzel yelled at her squad. She clicked the remote to the stereo, and I Love It by Icona Pop came pouring out. She smiled when Flynn waved at her, and she waved back with her blue pom-pom. She was dancing perfectly, every dance made with 100% accuracy when she saw Jack, Hiccup, and Merida watching her. She was okay with Merida and Hiccup, but having Jack watching her made her squirm uncomfortably, considering she was wearing less than a washcloth on her ass, and he practically asked her to sleep with him that night. Having him watch her just made her dance even harder. She didn't know why she was trying to prove herself, but she was tired of him always undermining her and what she can do. She changed the song to Dark Horse by Katy Perry and eyed him. She knew this dance was more provocative, and she wanted to really get under his skin after what he proposed to her. She turned her hips in a circular motion and dipped down. Coming up slowly, she looked at him and enjoyed how he was staring at her, not with a glare or with hatred, but just staring, like he missed how she became a woman, and she wasn't just a second grader that he hates anymore. Pyramid! She yelled, and her spotters lifted her up. She lifted up her pom-poms and smiled when she was at the top. Cradle! She yelled and started to fall forwards, but then panicked because she forgot she made the change today to put the spotters in the back. Whoa! She yelled as she was trying to put her weight backwards, but she was already leaning forward. Puns! Merida yelled, and she was running towards the field, but she was too far. Rapunzel's squad let go of her ankles, and she fell. Someone caught her just before she fell, and she looked at the ground, literally an inch before her nose. She stood up and whacked her spotter who caught her. Where were you? She yelled and pushed her spotter away. I mean, what the hell, Mark? It's not my fault you fell. You moved us to the back. You should have remembered. He yelled back at her. She gave him a glare and brushed herself off. Are you okay? Merida hugged her. Nothing I haven't done before. Rapunzel shrugged. She looked behind her and saw that Hiccup and Jack were behind her. Surprised you're happy I am not dead. Rapunzel glared at Jack. Jack glared back at her. I am just here because I wanted to see if you broke that pretty face of yours. She huffed and turned back to her squad. From the top? How was your first day of school, dear? Gothel asked Rapunzel as she walked in. Fine, Rapunzel shrugged. Same old. I almost broke my nose at cheerleading practice. Jack is now my bio partner for the whole year, and he and I only almost killed each other 3 times today. So, overall, and average day. Gothel looked sideways at her daughter. You know, it would do you some good to finally grow up and get along with him. Speaking of which, you are babysitting for the Frosts tonight. Rapunzel groaned and sat down on a bar stool. Do I have to? I already told Mrs. Frost you would babysit Jamie, Gothel told her. Don't try to get out of it. Don't you and them think it's kind of weird that Jack is my age and he can't be trusted to watch his little sister? Rapunzel thought out loud. He actually has plans tonight, that's why they asked you. Gothel smiled at her daughter. So don't assume he doesn't babysit. Fine, but I don't want to see him or else the house will probably blow up, Rapunzel warned, and went to her room to change. Thank you so much again for coming over on short notice, Rapunzel, Mrs. Frost smiled. Emma, Rapunzel is here. Rapunzel smiled at the brown-haired 8-year-old girl who came running down the hallway and hugged Rapunzel. Hi, Puns. We're going to have so much fun tonight. Indeed we are, Rapunzel smiled. Go and have fun, Mrs. Frost. Don't keep the husband waiting in the car anymore. Mrs. Frost smiled and said goodbye and left. So what do you want to do first? Rapunzel looked at Jamie. Color? Rapunzel smiled. That's just what I was thinking. They gathered the coloring books, papers, and crayons, and set up on the dining table. Rapunzel picked the princess coloring book and Emma went freehand. They were busy laughing and having a great time when Jack came downstairs, and Rapunzel instantly tensed. Hey there, Emma, Jack said and ruffled her hair. I love your flower. Thanks. Emma smiled at him. Rapunzel smiled briefly at the interaction between Jack and his sister, but it was immediately replaced by a frown when Jack looked over at her. Be careful, princess. That chair is mighty high. I wouldn't want you to fall out and break your nose again. He snickered, and she glared and she went back to her coloring. You know, ignoring me isn't going to make me stop. Jack walked over to her and leaned on the back of her chair. She still didn't say anything and just tried to scoot forward in her chair to get a little farther away from him. Jack, leave her alone! Emma yelled at Jack and Rapunzel smiled. Jack rolled his eyes. All right. Truce for now because of Emma. I'll see you guys later. Be good, Emma. Rapunzel watched as Jack left, and she heard him start his motorcycle outside and speed away. You know, he isn't really as bad as he seems. He helps me make tiaras. Emma smiled at Rapunzel. Rapunzel smiled back, but shook her head. I adore you, Em. But your brother and I will never get along. Emma continued to look at Rapunzel, but then went back to her drawing. Thank you again so much, Rapunzel. Mrs. Frost smiled at her. We had such fun. Mr. Frost smiled. He handed her $40 for the night, and Rapunzel said her goodbyes. She had put Emma to bed an hour ago and was ready to do the same herself. She said goodbye to them and started to walk out of their house. She was halfway across the road when she heard Jack coming up. She turned and saw him pull into the driveway and take his helmet off. Hey! He yelled at her, but she kept walking. She heard him running after her, but she kept walking. Hey! He jumped in front of her. I was calling you. I'm not a dog. She glared at him. You can't just tell me to stop and expect me to... He smiled. Have you thought about that offer? What offer? For tonight? His eyes gleamed. Rapunzel blushed and tried to walk around him. Nice try, Jack. She rolled her eyes and kept walking, but he stopped her again. I wasn't kidding. She looked up at him.
What are you talking about? Just because I hate you doesn't mean you don't have a hot body.
He winked at her, causing her to squirm uncomfortably.
Jack, let me just say this once so you can get it. Rapunzel started. You and me, never gonna happen. I don't even sex with Flynn. As weird as it is, I believe that should happen when you truly love someone. So it's not happening with him. It's sure as shit not gonna be with you. She pushed past him and quickly walked into her house. She didn't even say anything to her mother. She just climbed upstairs and changed into her exercise shorts and a sports bra, turning on her stereo. Man-Eater by Nelly Furtado came blasting through and she started to practice her dance moves. She liked this song because it made her feel sexy and actually graceful. She could actually shake her hips to his song. She was smiling and dancing her heart out. She was so close to completely forgetting about their encounter when she looked outside and saw Jack sitting at his desk doing his homework. Homework! Shit! She turned off the music and ran to her bathroom to change and then back to her room to get started on her already homework assignments
And her 2-paged essay for Mrs. Layton. You look tired, Merida commented as they drove to school. Hiccup got a ride today from his mum, so it was just them. Thanks, Rapunzel said sarcastically and yawned. I was up all night doing my homework. I completely forgot about my assignments. I was too busy learning new practices. Are you sure you should still keep up cheerleading? Merida looked at her friend with concern. It's starting to interfere with your everyday life and passing school. I'm fine, Rapunzel insisted and pulled into school. She was grateful there was no sign of Jack and his stupid motorcycle. She got out and Flynn automatically found her and snaked an arm around her waist. Hello, ladies, he pursed his lips. Rapunzel rolled her eyes. She sometimes hated how Flynn knew he was good-looking. At least Jack is somewhat humble, she thought, and then scolded herself for even thinking he was good-looking. She smiled at Merida, who said her goodbyes, and Rapunzel and Flynn walked to her locker together. Like yesterday, people just said hi and smiled at them. She was sick of the routine. Everything was so perfect and predictable. Through the crowd, she saw Jack talking to Hiccup, and they were laughing at something. At least he has somewhat different things that happen in his life, she thought to herself sadly. Sometimes she just thought, if it were even possible to put all the hatred behind them, they would be friends. But you could never trust him, she thought, and pulled herself back to the present, at Flynn adoring the spotlight. She loved him. But it seemed like they were just different after the summer, which she was exactly afraid of. He seemed more of a fake person than the real boy she fell in love with in 8th grade. You missed a great party last night, he smiled at her as they reached her locked. Somehow, I feel fine. She laughed sarcastically. You know I don't really like big parties anyways. Flynn sighed and looked at the other students. I don't want to be mean, but I feel like you've changed over the summer. She looked at him and was about to yell when she realized there would be no point. I changed because I don't want to immediately have sex with you or go to parties. That's not changing. That's becoming more of an adult, Flynn. You know, high school doesn't last forever, and when we graduate next year, what are you going to have? He looked at her and his face turned red. Oh, look who's talking. You fucking love the spotlight. You're head cheerleader. All the girls want to be you. You have everything. Don't tell me you don't like it. She felt tears brim her eyes, but she blinked them back. I don't want everything. I just want you to be real with me and not have to put on the whole, I'm a god, worship me at my feet show. I'm done with this conversation. He started to back away. When you found out what happened to my girlfriend, let me know. She turned and slammed her locker shut and walked in the opposite way. How could he talk to me like that? I wasn't being rude. I was just explaining myself. I am just sick of the fake way of life. Chapter 4. Jack. Uh-oh. Hiccup pointed to Flynn and Rapunzel. Looks like there is trouble in paradise. Jack turned and watched Flynn walk away, and Rapunzel slam her locker. Walking away? Who cares? They started to walk towards the courtyard where the rest of Jack's friends were hanging out. Hiccup wasn't like Jack's other friends. Hiccup was a good guy. Kind of a nerd. But he was loyal, and Jack liked that about him. Jack's other friends, however, were the kids you'd avoid if you saw them walking towards you. Hiccup didn't mind them, though. He knew they weren't bad kids. Just their piercings, tattoos, and the way they dressed made them look like assholes. Sup, boys? Jack sat down and crossed his legs. Hick, you gonna sit? Nah, I have to go to the computer lab. Hiccup waved at them. I'll catch up later, though. I still don't understand why you hang out with him sometimes. Jack's friend, Nod, said. He's a good kid, Jack told him. He's a better person than you lot. They all laughed and then quieted down when Rapunzel walked past them in a rush. She didn't even notice them. What's her problem? Nod asked. Ryder and her had a spat. Jack stuck his finger down his throat and pretended to gag. Got to admit, she had some guts doing what she did to you yesterday in bio, his other friend Guy said. Jack smiled. I thought it was pretty funny. I offered her to go a little farther last night, but she turned me down. They all laughed and Jack looked kind of hurt. Hey, I'm a good-looking bloke. We're not saying you aren't, Nod laughed. But Jack, don't be stupid. She's a princess and you're a guy she wouldn't even look twice at. Not to mention you two don't really get along. Hey, just because we don't get along doesn't mean I don't think she's hot, he defended himself. And I'm on her mind 24/7. She is always thinking about me. Yeah, Guy laughed. How much she hates you. I bet you couldn't get her to sleep with you for all the money in the world. Jack thought about what he said. Fine, but I don't have that much cash. How about my bike? What? Guy looked at him weirdly. Dude, I was kidding. I'm not. Jack laughed. If I get her to sleep with me, you have to give me your... I don't know. All your stuff is shitty. Oh, I know. Your yellow submarine record that's actually signed by the Beatles. Guy blanched, but then thought about his prize. And if by some miracle you do get her to sleep with her, you have to give me your bike. Fine, it's just a 10-speed. I never ride it anyways. Jack laughed. Not your fucking mountain bike, you moron. Guy rolled his eyes. Your motorcycle. Jack thought over what Guy said. He loved his bike. It was the most precious thing in the world to him, besides Emma, of course. What's the time span? Jack asked. Before the year ends. Guy smiled. Jack laughed. That's like a whole year. Pleasey. You got a deal. He shook Guy's hand and Nod groaned. This isn't going to be good. Hello, princess. Jack sat down next to Rapunzel and smiled. She didn't even look at him, just glared at the back of Flynn's head. Mind me asking what's wrong? Jack asked, which he instantly regretted when Rapunzel turned to him, her eyes blazing. You want to know what's wrong? Rapunzel gritted through her teeth. He acts like he's damn king of this place. What happens after high school, Jack? He's gonna get a job, and if he messes up, then what? Say to his boss how he was prom king and that he was popular? He doesn't think about the long run. I'm just so sick of the fake life, you know. Jack didn't even respond. He was surprised at how much she had opened up to him that he couldn't even say anything. Her face fell and she turned back around. I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me to talk about that, especially with you. Jack didn't say anything in return, and just turned to look in the front of the class. He didn't know that she felt that way. He always thought that she loved the spotlight. And on some level, he was sure she did enjoy it. But she was an actual person. He never really thought of her like that. Welcome, class. Mrs. Layton walked in. I can see everyone is here today. That's a lot better than yesterday. So to start of the day, let's start with a pop quiz. There was multiple moans and groans. We haven't even learned anything from you yet. Flynn spoke up. Then expect a 0, she told him. She handed out the papers, and Jack already had his completed by the time she was done. He took the rest of the time to just zone out and think about all Rapunzel had said. He was brought back to the present when Mrs. Layton announced to collect the papers and bring them up to her. He looked over at Rapunzel's and noticed how she didn't even fill out her name. She was too busy thinking he suspected. He grabbed hers and brought his pencil up with him to Mrs. Layton's desk. Mr. Frost, hand over the tests. She stuck out her hand as students dropped their quizzes into it. Oh, sorry. I just forgot to write my name. He smiled and wrote it down quickly. He passed in the papers and went back to sit down. For the rest of the class, Rapunzel didn't even say anything. And for once, Jack didn't feel the need to irritate her. Jack saw Rapunzel head to her car after school and was confused. She usually had cheer practice right now. Where are you going? Jack walked up behind her. She turned, saw him, and then continued to walk. Home. I thought you had practice. Don't tell me you're gonna start being nice to me because of what I said in bio. She rolled her eyes and got into her car. What if I want to start being nice? He smiled at her and leaned on the other side of her car window since the top was down. You? Being nice to me? Don't make me laugh, Jack. She rolled her eyes. I'm a princess who has a perfect life and does nothing except shop and buy things. You said so yourself yesterday. Only because you told people I want a sex change. He laughed. He hopped into the passenger seat.
What in the world are you doing? You're contaminating my car. She grimaced. She would have pushed him out, but that involved touching him. I want to show you something. He smiled. Let's go. She eyed him, but then put her car in drive and reversed. You better not kill me.
He laughed as they drove off. From the entrance of the school, Flynn looked at his girlfriend driving away with Jack, and he saw Jack laughing. Not on my watch, he thought as he frowned at her driving away. So where are we going? Rapunzel asked him as she drove on. Pull the car over, he told her, and was surprised when she did so. You're not putting up much of a fight today, he noted as they got out and passed each other to switch. I'm not in the mood today, Jack, she commented, slipping into the passenger seat. Just take me where you want so I can go home quicker. Such enthusiasm, he smiled. It's almost contagious. He turned to face her and saw she wanted to laugh, but because she was with him, she wouldn't. So where are we going? She asked again. Jack smiled. You'll see. It's like an hour drive though, so get comfortable. Rapunzel slumped lower in her seat and just looked out the window. Penny for you thoughts? Jack spoke. Why are you doing this? You hate me, she quietly said. First of all, I have never hated you, he confessed. I just strongly dislike you. Second, maybe I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. Both of our best friends are good friends. Why not start over? Because I don't trust you, she snapped. He gripped the steering wheel. Well, clearly you must on some level considering you let me drive your car with you in it. She realized he was right, and turned away. I know you're not going to kill me. I mean, I can't trust anything about you. Like I could never tell you things, and I could never be close with you. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. Fine. We still have some driving to do, so why don't you tell me about yourself? What? You know me? I've lived across the road from you for years. She looked at him like he was stupid. Yeah, I know who you are, but I don't really know you, he corrected her. What do you like to do? What do you do when you're upset? What's your mom like? Speaking of your mom, why don't you two look alike?
In any way, I don't know. Genetics, I guess, she told him. Oh no, that's not genetics. There is nothing similar about you two. He laughed. She had black curly hair, pale skin, and completely different features. You are the exact opposite of everything I just said about her. Maybe my father? Your father? Where is he? Jack inquired. Rapunzel shrugged. Don't know. Never met him. Mom said he wasn't worth meeting, that he made his choice and it didn't involve us. Haven't you ever been curious? Well, of course I have, but what will that do? She told him. He didn't want me. Why would I want him? Jack shrugged and kept driving. Should you call your mother and say you will be home later? He watched Rapunzel pull out her cell phone and dial her mother's number. Hi, Mom. It's me. No, everything is fine. I'm just going to be home a little late. Who am I with? Jack saw Rapunzel look at him from the corner of her eye. I'm with Jack. He was surprised that she actually said she was with him. No, I am not lying, Jack laughed. I am going somewhere with him. I don't know where, actually. He said he's surprising me. I don't why he's doing it either. Well, geez, thanks, Mom. You know, he may just want to hang out. I am a likable person, believe it or not. Oh my God. Okay, Mom. I got it. Okay, bye. Rapunzel chucked her phone in the back seat. Ah! Jack was laughing hysterically. That was hilarious. She's completely mental, Rapunzel exclaimed and laughed a little with him. Jack was looking at her and smiling. He liked that she was laughing along with him. He guesses she must have noticed she was actually laughing with him because she stopped and just looked out the window. You know, it's just us. You don't have to put on a show for me, Jack told her. You are allowed to laugh with me without people looking at us. She eyed him but kept looking out the window. He could tell she was thinking over what he said, though. They rode in silence for a while. Rapunzel was getting used to the silence when Jack spoke and startled her. We're almost there. Rapunzel nodded. They were in a neighboring town called Berk. There wasn't much here. It was a rather small city. What are we doing here? Rapunzel asked him. It's getting late. This town doesn't really have much. Just trust me, will you? Take a chance and trust me. He smiled. He pulled into the parking garage of a bank building. What are we doing here? Rapunzel looked at him with confusion. If I have to say trust me one more time, I swear. He winked at her and got out when they pulled into a spot. She got up and followed him as he started walking up the staircase of the garage. The sun will be setting soon, Rapunzel told him. Precisely. He smiled. He could tell she still didn't know what he was up to, but he liked that.
He really wanted this to be a surprise. If he had any chance to win the bet, he needed her to actually like spending time with him. They kept climbing, and Rapunzel remained quiet. Jack was happy that this parking garage was rather big, but he soon discovered that they were now in the actual bank since the parking garage was connected to the actual bank. Rapunzel noticed too. Jack, are we going to get in trouble for being in the bank offices? So what if we do? He smiled at her and kept walking. He was actually getting kind of tired, so was grateful when they got to the last floor. This way. He carefully opened the door and was silently relieved no alarms went off. This way, milady. He gestured for Rapunzel to walk in first, but she remained where she was. He rolled his eyes and walked onto the roof. She followed him and gasped at the sight. He smiled at her as she had the biggest smile spread across her face. "Oh, Jack!" She clapped her hands together, walking towards the edge of the roof. He looked out and had to admit this was a damn good idea. It was indeed gorgeous. The sun was setting, and it was setting the sky ablaze. You could see where the city ended, and then it was just fields and grass. "Here!" Jack sat down on a vent and patted next to him. She walked over and hopped up next to him. "It's beautiful, Jack." She smiled at the sky. "I really needed this. Figured the way you went nuts on me earlier." He smiled at her. She didn't even look at him. She was too captivated by the sunset. "So how many other girls have you brought up here?" She smirked, not tearing her eyes away from the sky, though. Jack sucked in a breath. "None, actually." She looked at him, and he was happy she was surprised. "Really? It's gorgeous. This place could make anyone fall in love with someone." She realized what she said and turned away. "This was just an idea I got today to take you here," he told her. "I've seen this building before and always wondered what it would be like up top of it. Figured I'd take you with me." She actually smiled at him, and he couldn't remember the last time she smiled at him. "Well, thanks, Jack. This is great." They sat in silence as they watched the sun slowly set behind the horizon, and Jack realized he actually didn't mind spending time with her. This was actually pretty nice. After the sun set, Jack sighed and jumped off the vent. "Need a hand?" he asked her, and she nodded. He placed his hands on her hips as she jumped down. He liked the feeling of how small she was in his hands. "Ready to go?" Jack asked her. She nodded. "I wish the sun didn't set. It was beautiful." Jack had hoped there was a hidden meaning when she said that she didn't wish the sun had set, but he wasn't going to get his hope. This was the first time they had hung out in a long time without insulting each other. They drove off into the night, heading back home. They didn't really say much, but Jack felt a calmness between them and he liked it. He pulled into the school's parking lot and pulled up next to his motorcycle. He paused before he left the car, hoping Rapunzel would say something, but she just got out of the passenger seat and came around her car to the driver's side. Jack sighed and opened the door and got out. He stood in front of her and she looked up at him for a record amount of time. "Thanks, Jack," she finally said. "That really was great. I had a great time." "Really? Really, really?" She gave a small smile and got into her car. Jack shut the door and was about to walk away, but Rapunzel spoke up again. "I'm not saying I like you, but I think I dislike you a little less." He smiled and waved as she pulled out and drove home. "This is going perfectly." Chapter 5. Rapunzel. "So where were you last night?" Gothel asked Rapunzel. Rapunzel yawned. "I told you. I was hanging out with Jack last night." "I know. I just wanted to hear you say it again." Gothel smirked at Rapunzel, who glared at her mother while she ate her breakfast. "What did you guys do?" Gothel asked. "Honestly, I'm surprised I didn't see a bomb explosion on the news." "Shut up!" Rapunzel scolded her mom. "He actually took me to a very nice place. He was very sweet." "He was sweet? That's a sentence I thought you would never say. Where did he take you?" "He took me to Burke." "Burke? What on earth is there?" "Not much, but Jack was resourceful." Rapunzel gave a small smile. "He took me to the top of a very large back tower and we watched the sunset." "Really?" Gothel smiled and raised her eyebrows. "He drove you an hour away and an hour back to watch the sunset with you?" "Yeah, so? I had a rough day yesterday. He did it to make me feel better." Rapunzel shrugged. "Rapunzel? Oh, honey, please tell me I raised you smarter than this. Just listen to the everything you just told me." Gothel laughed. "Jack, the boy you have hated, and he's hated you for years, saw you had a rough day, drove an hour away, an hour out of his life to only spend the night with you, the girl he hated, to watch the sunset, and then drive an hour back." Rapunzel thought over what her mom said, but told her, "It doesn't mean anything." Our best friends are friends. We decided to be a little more civil for their sake. Fine! Gothel rolled her eyes and started to do the dishes. Whatever helps you sleep at night, but think about this. Are you going to tell Flynn that happened? You know, since you and Jack are only friends? Rapunzel glared at her mother's back and left the table to go get ready for school. Her mother was right as much as hated to admit it. She wasn't going to tell Flynn that she spent her night with Jack. He would go on a murderous rampage. She sighed, reaching her room. She really wasn't in the mood to go to school, especially after Flynn's behavior yesterday. She was a little irritated that he hadn't even texted her yet. Whatever. If he's going to be an ass, then I'm just going to ignore him. Not seeing Loverboy today. She heard someone approach her locker. She shut it and saw Jack leaning against the lockers. No. She sighed and walked away. Is it because we hung out yesterday? Jack asked loudly enough for people to actually look at them. She knew they heard what he said, but she was tired of caring what people thought. No. It's still about the reason why I was pissed at him yesterday, Rapunzel told him. Look, I don't know what has inspired you to walk with me and spend time with me, but I'm not in the mood to talk today, Jack. Why? Because I don't feel like it. Don't you ever just feel like something? She snapped. Oh wait, I forgot. You don't feel anything. I don't feel anything? He laughed sarcastically. She turned to him and was surprised to see he actually looked kinda hurt. Jack, I'm sorry, I didn't... No. I mean, you're right. He looked at her, but he wasn't smiling anymore. I don't feel anything. I didn't feel anything when I seeked you out after school. I didn't feel anything when I drove you literally an hour away from here to take you to the top of a building. I didn't feel anything when you poured your heart out to me in bio. I didn't feel anything when we watched the sunset together. You know, I thought you were different than judging people like that, but I guess I was wrong. Here I am, trying to be friends with you, and you just fight and come with a knife. You can't trust. And that's your problem. I have given you no reason since school started to not trust me, but you just can't change. He walked away from her and she actually felt herself tear up a little. She scolded herself. Why does it matter what he thinks? Since when did she care what he thought? Rapunzel looked down and walked to bio. When she walked into bio and frowned when she didn't see Jack sitting in his seat. She sat down and hung her head. She was still pissed, but she was pissed at Flynn, not at Jack. She kind of understood why he was so upset with her on some level. She unrightfully yelled at him when he treated her to a really nice evening when she was upset. She put her hand in her hand and frowned at the whiteboard as Mrs. Layton droned about molecules. She looked over at Flynn and he was glaring at her. What? She mouthed to him, and she thought she saw him mouth, you know what? After class, Rapunzel walked out of the room before anyone else. She was angry at Jack now because he skipped the class and she knew he was here somewhere. She was going towards the parking lot to see if his motorcycle was still there, when she felt someone grab her arm and she dropped her books. Hey! She turned and scolded Flynn. What the hell? She bent over and picked her books up as he asked her, What's this I'm hearing about you and Frost? The correct grammar is Jack. And you, first of all, and second, nothing, she huffed. What has gotten into you? What's gotten into me? Rapunzel laughed sarcastically. You are the one that is making me feel like a bad girlfriend for not jumping into your pants as soon as you came back from vacation. Well, maybe I'm sick of my girlfriend who supposedly loves me putting me on the back burner for a delinquent who she supposedly hated forever, Finn yelled in her face. Rapunzel was about to yell back, but just turned back around, looking for Jack's motorcycle. Hey! I'm talking to you! Flynn walked up next to her again and pulled her shoulder towards him. Ouch! That hurts Flynn! She tried to pull his hand off of her, but he was gripping her shoulder tightly and squeezing. What are you doing in the parking lot anyways? Looking for your new boyfriend? Flynn asked her. Just admit it, Rapunzel. You don't want to be with me anymore. Rapunzel struggled under his grip, but still answered him. No, Flynn. That's not it. I just am tired of you pressuring me to sleep with you. Well, maybe because I got a taste of it and I want more, he told her, shaking her shoulder roughly. Then do it with someone else. She grunted and winced at his grip. Because I am tired of whatever this is. Fine, he yelled and pushed her backwards, causing her books to fly in the air, and she landed on the ground roughly, catching herself on her palms, which tore them up a bit. She watched him walk off and winced as she looked at her hands that were cut up. She looked around and was grateful that none of the students or teachers were hanging around. She picked up her books and around her and winced at the pain when she got up. Her leg was slightly scratched up since she wore a dress today, and she saw her shoulder starting to bruise. She sighed and was happy at least it was over. "Ready!" She yelled at her squad and started to play Timber by K. Ha. She was surprised at herself when she saw Jack, Merida, and Hiccup watching them again, and she was kinda happy to see Jack. She pushed the feeling down and let herself feel carefree, dancing to music. They just got their new uniforms that day, so they were wearing them, testing them out. It was blue and white, and Rapunzel felt glorious in it. Merida and Hiccup clapped when Rapunzel did a front flip and a full twisted layout, and she waved back at them. She frowned when she looked over and saw Flynn watching her, and she knew he saw Jack with Merida and Hiccup too. She remembered that she has to smile for the routine and plastered on her best smile she could. She was in the middle of doing another trick when a football came flying towards her and hit her right in the stomach. "Oomph!" She grunted and fell backwards. She sucked in air and winced again. She seriously was getting sick of being hurt today. She sat up and tried to catch her breath since the air got knocked right out of her lungs. She felt her spotter come over to her and she tried to catch her balance. She looked over and saw Jack, Merida, and Hiccup running over to her. "Oi, are you okay, Punce?" Merida walked over to her. She nodded and stood on her own. I'm fine, she told them. "Guys, keep practicing. I'm gonna go get a drink. Anna, take over for me, please." Anna beamed at her chance to boss the squad around as Rapunzel walked away with Jack, Hiccup, and Merida. Hiccup helped Rapunzel sit down and reached for her water bottle. Jack had grabbed the football before they walked over and was still holding, glaring at the team. "Hey, sorry about that." Flynn jogged up to them smiling. "You know how practices are." Rapunzel glared at him and wheezed. "You did that on purpose." Flynn smiled. "Now why would I hurt you?" "Because you nearly broke my shoulder earlier," she wheezed out. "And because I dumped your ass." Merida and Hiccup looked at each other in shock, but Jack just continued to glare at Flynn. "What you looking at, Frost?" Flynn smirked. "Just letting you know, she doesn't put out, so don't even bother." Jack looked over at Rapunzel and noticed her shoulder bruised and how her thigh was also scratched up and bruised. "Did you do that to her?" Jack asked Flynn, pointing at Rapunzel. Flynn scoffed. "What? How dare I damage her perfection image?" Jack threw the football down and punched Flynn across the face. Flynn stumbled backwards and landed on the ground. Jack jumped up on top of him, grabbing his shirt collar and punching him in the jaw. "Jack, get off of him!" Rapunzel wheezed out and stumbled over to them, pulling on Jack's shirt.
Flynn managed to flip Jack over so he was on top of him and punched Jack in the eye. "Stop it!" Rapunzel yelled at them, and students were starting to gather around them. She was pulling at Flynn when he turned to her and backhanded her to get off of him. People gasped at him, hitting a girl and pulled him off of Jack, who was now sporting quite a purple eye. "That's enough!" Principal Pitch came in. You, and you, my office, now. Now!" Mr. Pitch looked at Jack, Rapunzel, and Flynn behind his desk. "Rapunzel, explain to me what happened. Why does she get to go first?" Flynn interrupted. "Because you hit her, so I don't really care what you have to say, Mr. Ryder." Mr. Pitch looked at him, which shut Flynn up real quick. "Well," Rapunzel started, "Jack and Flynn were fighting because Flynn hit me with the football pretty hard." Jack rolled his eyes. "Seriously? You're even going to protect him after all this?" "No. What really happened is these two broke up earlier, and because Flynn was pissed, he bruised her shoulder and her thigh, which is also cut up, punted a football in her stomach, knocking the wind out of her, and then backhanded her in the face." Rapunzel felt tears brim her eyes, and she looked down. She felt weak and incompetent. She couldn't even stand up for herself. "Flynn, is this true?" Mr. Pitch asked him. "Are you kidding me? Can you blame me? She's being a right-out bitch," Flynn yelled, pointing at Rapunzel. "Jack, Rapunzel," Mr. Pitch addressed them. "You may be excused. Mr. Ryder, we're going to be calling your parents." Jack helped Rapunzel up, and they walked out. They didn't say anything until they reached outside, and then Jack turned to her. "Why didn't you come to me?" "What are you talking about?" Rapunzel asked, moving past him back to the gym locker room to get her clothes and out of her uniform. "Rapunzel, he hurt you. You were a victim of domestic violence. Why didn't you come and tell me?" Jack yelled after her. She turned and yelled at him. "Since when did you care, Jack? Since when did you care about anything that happened to me? When?" He eyed her and sighed. "I don't know, Rapunzel.
I just do. So why don't you just accept the fact I am going to, from now, be a constant nuisance in your life, because you apparently can't handle yourself on your own. She glared at him and walked away. She was glad he didn't follow after her, but she was thinking over what he said. She apparently wasn't capable of handling herself. That prick. Chapter 6. Jack. Jack knocked on Rapunzel's front door harder. Merida and Hiccup were giggling behind him like little schoolgirls. Would you to shut it? Jack whispered to them. We're surprising her. Jack's mother and Rapunzel's mother had gone out on a girls' night and wouldn't be back until later that night. They heard Rapunzel walk down the stairs and open the door. Greetings, Jack yelled and smiled. Surprise, Merida and Hiccup yelled. Jesus Christ, Rapunzel yelled and placed her hand over her heart. You guys scared me. What are you doing here? Your mother is out. My mother's out. Let's have some fun. Jack winked and stepped past her into her house, Merida and Hiccup following. Jack heard Rapunzel yelling at Merida, asking her why they are there, but Jack ignored her. He was busy looking around her house. He thought back to the last time he was here, and it was fuzzy. He was only about 7. Guys, I appreciate this, but why are you here? She asked them, exasperated. Jack laughed. Because your ex beat you up today, and we thought you could use some cheering up. I brought the drinks. It's a Friday night. We don't have to get up early.
I already told my dad I'm over here. Merida is spending the night here, and Hiccup is sleeping over my house. Don't fight it. Remember, I'm going to be a constant thing in your life now.
He smirked and brought out a bottle of vodka and a bottle of tequila from his bag. Rapunzel was about to tell him no, but she couldn't resist his smirk. He was kind of charming in a way. Fine, Rapunzel sighed. Glasses are in the cupboard. Shot glasses are on the top shelf. Why are telling? Show me, Jack smiled. You're doing it too. She rolled her eyes and walked to the kitchen with him as Merida and Hiccup started going through Netflix trying to find a movie to watch. I'm not good at shots, Jack, Rapunzel told him and got out the glasses. Besides, people make stupid choices when they drink tequila. Maybe it's time we make some stupid choices. Jack winked at her, and he liked when she blushed. I've made enough stupid decisions for now, Jack. Rapunzel frowned, and he knew she was thinking about Flynn. Enough of thinking of that asshole. We all have bad exes. I mean, hell, mine is Elsa. She's a nightmare. He laughed. Now let's drink to our exes. He poured out 2 tequila shots, cut up a lime, and got the salt. Ready? Jack asked her. Lick your wrist. She laughed a little and did as she was told. Now sprinkle a little salt on it. She did so, and he pushed a lime wedge and a shot to her. Ready? Lick first, then drink, and we'll make it a game as to who goes towards the lime first. He smiled. She nodded. Ready? He smiled. Lick. He laughed as Rapunzel winced against the taste of the salt and drank the shot quickly. Ooh! She pinched her face against the taste. She immediately went for the lime wedge and sucked the juice out of it, relishing in the taste of the lime juice and not the bitter drink. She looked at Jack as he grabbed HSI wedge and sucked the juice out of it. Oi! Way to start without us. Merida came in smiling. Next shot! I just can't believe I was with a guy like that! Rapunzel yelled out and choked down another shot. The group had relocated into the living room and were sitting on blankets and pillows, watching The Nightmare Before Christmas. Jack and Rapunzel both chose it, and Jack was surprised Rapunzel liked Tim Burton. You guys were like, I don't know, like teen royalty? Except he was king of assholes. Merida laughed, and Rapunzel laughed with her. Rapunzel was still laughing when she looked at Jack. He was leaning against the couch and just eyeing her. She kind of liked the way he was looking at her. Jack had his eyes half closed, watching her from the side of his eyes and smirking. She smiled back at him and poured another shot for herself. Whoa, slow down, killer. Jack laughed and pulled the shot away from her. I don't want your kidneys or liver to give out. You're not the boss of me. She smiled and crawled over to him and sat in his lap, taking the shot out of his hand. He was surprised at how close she was willing to get to him. He wrapped an arm around, and she smiled as she wrapped his arms around his neck. Merida looked at Hiccup in surprise, but they just shrugged it off. Want to show me your house? Jack smiled at her. He was happy that he was making such progress with his bet. He didn't even have to convince her to touch him. She just willingly jumped into his lap. She nodded and wobbled onto her feet, pulling him with her. They left Merida and Hiccup looking after them with curiosity. This is my mother's room. She gestured to a door and tripped her way over to hers. And this is my room. She opened the door, and Jack walked in. He was surprised. It wasn't as pink and girl as he was expecting. She had lanterns strung across her ceiling and she had white furniture in it. Her bedspread was a multicolored sewn blanket. What really captured his eyes was her walls. They were painted in different designs, words, people, food, travel sites, anything. I remember your walls being white. He smiled and walked towards the wall with the windows that face his room. Your room faces my room, he commented and smiled. Do you ever see me? Yes, she admitted. Normally she wouldn't be this open. But you know, after countless shots, one's common sense flies out the window. This room isn't even the most painted, she told him. Follow me. She smiled and skipped out of her room, and Jack smiled, following. She walked up to another door and opened it to a staircase. This is our attic. Well, my art room / the attic. She walked up and displayed her arms. Ta-da! Wow! Jack breathed and looked around. Even though he was wasted, he still would have been shocked. The room was split in half by a sheet. Why's it split in half? Jack asked, peering around the sheet. That's the side of the attic, she said with flair and laughed. Ooh. Jack went behind it and emerged with a box. Gothel's things? Jack, stop it. Rapunzel waved at him and started to walk down. Mum doesn't like us going through her things. I need more drinks. In a second. Jack laughed, opening the lid of the box. Ooh, pictures. Maybe I'll find some nudes. Jack, put it away. Rapunzel walked over to him and tried to pull the box out of his hand. But in doing so, the box went flying and the pictures scattered everywhere. Now look what you did! Rapunzel glared at him and went to pick up the pictures, falling on her face in the process, but picked herself back up. Me? You did it! Jack glared back and went to pick up the pictures. They were piling them together when Jack spoke up. Hey, isn't that you? Rapunzel glanced quickly over at the picture. Yeah, that's me at the hospital when I was born, and that's my mum. You know that. Rapunzel, Gothel isn't the one holding you, Jack said awkwardly. What are you? Rapunzel looked at him and froze. The picture was of her, and Gothel was in the picture, but Gothel wasn't the one holding her. In the picture, Rapunzel was in the arms of a blonde woman who was in a hospital gown in the bed. She had a serious expression on and was looking out the window. Gothel had her hand on the woman's shoulder and was smiling. Rapunzel, who is that? Jack asked. I don't know. She looked at him and he was frowning. But we gotta get these photos in the box. He and her put the photos away. But Rapunzel folded the photo quickly and put it in her jeans pocket. They walked downstairs, and Jack looked at Rapunzel with concern. He wasn't going to jump to any conclusions, but he knew what she was thinking. She was wondering if Gothel was hiding something huge. He shoved down his thoughts and went into the kitchen and grabbed another bottle of tequila from the kitchen. I think we are in need of more drinks. Jack smiled, and Rapunzel instantly grabbed the bottle from his hand, unscrewed it, and started to drink from the bottle. Easy there, tiger. Jack smiled and took the bottle out of her hand. Don't get all worked up right now, please. Just relax. Have some more fun. Fun and Funner are asleep. She pointed at Merida, who were passed out among some pillows. Well, Hiccup is sleeping here because I am dragging him the street. Rapunzel smiled and leaned against the chair. Jack picked up the remote and flicked through TV shows. Bob's Burgers. Jack smiled. I love that show. I do too. Rapunzel half smiled. Jack turned on the show and crawled onto the couch, laying on his back facing the TV. Rapunzel looked over at him and crawled over to him and onto the couch, nestling into his side. Jack looked down and was surprised to see the girl curling into him and closing her eyes. He carefully put his arm around her and sighed. He was beginning to wonder if the bet was worth it. Chapter 7. Rapunzel. Rapunzel could feel the sun behind her eyelids and she squinted. She could feel someone breathing beneath her and she felt hot. She felt really hot. She opened her eyes and glared at the sunlight. She blinked away the spots in her eyes and moaned at the... She lifted her head and she saw who was underneath. Jack had his right arm under his head and his other arm wrapped around. Their limbs were tangled together and they had a blanket draped over them. Would explain why I'm burning hot. She tried to get up, but she didn't want to wake Jack up, and that didn't seem possible. She sighed and laid her head back down on his chest and listened to his heart beat softly in his chest. She wouldn't admit this to Merida or anyone. She could barely admit it to herself, but she kinda liked the feeling of laying against him. He was warm, and his shirt was soft, and he smelled amazing. She liked the feeling of his arm around. She was just falling back asleep peacefully when her mother came. Wake you, everyone up. She was banging a spoon against a pot and singing loudly, Wake up, rise and shine, everyone. Rapunzel sighed and hid her face in Jack's chest as he moaned and threw his arm over his face. She missed his arm around her, but secretly smiled when he put it back. "Oh God, my head!" Merida moaned and threw her blankets over her head. "I feel like I'm dying." Hiccup groaned and sat up. "Oh, my head. That's why happens when we down 3 bottles of tequila and a bottle of vodka." Gothel smiled. "By the way, I'm not too impressed about it either. I have taken the liberty of alerting your parents that I will make this as painful as possible." Gothel laughed and walked into the kitchen, leaving the 4 to get up. Rapunzel watched as Merida went upstairs to Rapunzel's bathroom, and Hiccup went down the hallway to the other bathroom. Rapunzel sighed, not wanting to get up yet. "Your mother is evil," Jack complained, and brought his other arm around Rapunzel so he was hugging her. "Don't want to get up yet." Rapunzel shook her head and nestled into him more. "Well, don't you seem comfortable with me?" Jack smiled, and Rapunzel looked at him, glaring. "I'm just comfortable. But I suppose," she sighed, "it's time to get up." She was about to start sitting up, but Jack hugged her back down. "Just give me another minute, because when we get up, this probably isn't going to happen like this again." Rapunzel smiled and hugged him back, and he nestled his face into her blonde hair. It was soft, and she felt him inhale deeply. Rapunzel sighed again and started to push away. She swears she felt him kiss the top of her head gently. She stretched and brought her hand up to her head. "Oh, my head." "Yeah, that happens." Jack laughed and sat up with her. "Oh, I don't think your mom needs to punish me. My head's doing that enough." Rapunzel smiled and rubbed her hands on her thighs. She looked down when she felt something in her jean pocket and then frowned. She remembered the picture. That picture. Jack saw her, looked at her pocket, and nudged her shoulder. "Don't jump to anything yet. Right now, just eat breakfast with us, take some aspirin, take a shower, and then question it. Okay?" Rapunzel nodded and stood up, walking towards the kitchen. "Well, I made pancakes and nice creamy eggs." Gothel smiled and waved the frying pan with the eggs in it near Rapunzel, who gagged. "Excuse me." Rapunzel covered her mouth and ran past Jack to go to her bathroom. Excuse you!" Merida yelled at Rapunzel, who burst through the door and slid to the toilet, which she then proceeded to throw up. Merida was at the sink trying to brush out her big red hair. She dropped the brush and went over to Rapunzel, rubbing her back as she threw up the contents of all the alcohol and food she ate last night. "There they are." Gothel smiled as Merida and Rapunzel walked into the kitchen. Jack and Hiccup were already at the table, slowly eating the pancakes, but they stayed away from the eggs. "Did you barf?" Hiccup laughed and then moaned as his stomach rumbled. "Yep," Rapunzel answered.
But I feel a lot better now that I did.
She sat down and picked at her pancakes with a fork. Her mind couldn't stop wandering to the photo in her jeans. She felt her foot get kicked and she looked over at Jack. "Remember what I said?" He eyed her and she nodded quickly. "Boy, didn't you and Merida look comfortable this morning?" Jack laughed at Hiccup and he blushed, but Merida shot out. "At least we weren't literally on top of each other, hugging each other even after we got up." Rapunzel glared at Merida. "I was drunk. I would have snuggled up next to a pig if I could have." "Well, I feel like I did," Jack mumbled, and Rapunzel glared at him. "What the hell was that? We spend a great night together. We cuddle. He kisses my head this morning. He tells me he's going to be more in my life now, and I have to get used to it. He punches out my ex, and now he calls me a pig?" Rapunzel frowned as she walked to her mom's bedroom door. She took a deep breath and held up her hand. Now or never. She knocked softly and her mother answered. "Come in, sweetheart." Rapunzel walked in and shut the door behind her. "Mum, I need to talk to you." "Is this about your punishment for drinking last night?" She quirked an eyebrow. She had paperwork spread on her bed that she needed to get done for work. "No," Rapunzel shook her head. "It's about something I found." "Well, Jack and I found—" "Oh!" Gothel had her pen in her hand and was writing something out. "What did you two find?" We found Rapunzel started to stammer. "Rapunzel, I hate the mumbling." Gothel looked at her daughter and then back at her work. "I'm busy, honey. Spit it out." "We found this." Rapunzel thrusted the picture towards Gothel quickly. Gothel looked over at the photo and then picked up the photo. The color in her face drained and she looked from Rapunzel back to the photo. "That's me," Rapunzel said quietly. "Isn't it?" "Yes." Gothel nodded and put the photo down. "Then who is that?" Rapunzel asked, but she already knew the answer. "Your mother." Rapunzel wiped away a tear and pushed herself back and forth in the swing. She had to get out of the house after everything was told to her. She didn't walk. She ran. She ran away from her home, from her mother. She started to cry again and she wiped away the tears. What happened? She heard behind her and she saw Jack. "What are you doing here?" she choked out. "I saw you leave and I wanted to make sure you're okay," he answered her and saw down on the swing next to her. She started to cry again and Jack just stayed silent. It felt like an hour passed before Rapunzel spoke. "She told me that's my mother, Jack." Jack looked at her and her eyes, usually filled with life and happiness, were clouded over and dull. "So what happened?" Jack inquired further. "She told me that was her friend. They'd been friends for a while, since high school. Like Merida and me," she started. "She got pregnant at some party in college. Gothel was so happy for her. She gave birth to me and gave me to Gothel. Gothel can't have kids, and my mother felt bad for her. My mom said that my birth mother couldn't support me and couldn't take care of, so Gothel adopted me." "Where is your mother now?" Jack asked. "This place in California." Rapunzel wiped her tears away. "Do you know her name?" "Aurora." Rapunzel smiled. "So I take it she named you?" Jack smiled a little. "Rapunzel Aurora, your mom had a thing for fairy tales." "So it would seem." Rapunzel laughed a little, but then she started to cry again. "Jack, why wouldn't my mom tell me this? Or should I call her Gothel now? I don't even know who my father is." She bent down and hugged her knees, crying softly. "I just wish I knew her. I just wish I could meet her." Jack got up and walked in front of Rapunzel, kneeling down in front of her. "Let's do it then." "What?" Rapunzel looked at him and smiled awkwardly. Very funny. "I'm not kidding." Jack looked at her. "I've always wanted to go to California and now I have a reason." "Jack, we can't just go." Rapunzel sat up and rolled her eyes. "It's the middle of the school year. We hardly know each other." "Rapunzel, stop making excuses!" Jack yelled at her and stood up. "You don't have a right to bitch and cry if I just offered you a way to meet her. Stop making excuses. You're scared. That's okay, but this is your mother. If you don't go, you're always going to wonder what if. What's worse?" Rapunzel turned away and swung slowly, thinking about what Jack said. "He's right. You're just making excuses. Jack just offered a way to meet her, so what are you going to do?" Rapunzel put her backpack over her and buttoned her jacket. She carefully shut the door and saw Jack sitting at the end of her driveway with his motorcycle. "Ready?" he asked her. She nodded quickly and grabbed his spare helmet. She felt the pressure of it all. The pressure of leaving school, leaving the home she knew, her mom, her friends. She was leaving it all to travel across the country with a boy she's hated forever. Let's go. Chapter 8. Jack. "So, what did you write to your mom?" Jack yelled to Rapunzel over the wind. They had already rode an hour, and he could tell Rapunzel was nervous. She was practically shaking with nerves against him. "I don't want to talk about it right now," she yelled back and clung to him tighter, wrapping his arms tighter around her waist. "Okay." He nodded and drove faster, causing her to shriek and grab onto him tighter. It was about 2 in the morning, and Jack wanted to get the most distance as he could from their home in California before their parents woke up. He wrote a note to his mother and father explaining what happened, and that he needed to help Rapunzel out, that he had to do this. He felt good about helping her, but the guilt of the bet was weighing him down, that the only reason he started to hang out with her was to just get into her pants. He actually genuinely enjoyed her company now, but it only happened because of a stupid bet he should have never made. "All right, I think it's time for breakfast," Jack yelled over to her. They had just crossed the state line into Alabama. They drove on until they saw a sign that advertised for a diner off of an exit. They continued down the exit until they saw the diner up ahead. When Rapunzel got off, she moaned and rubbed her backside. "I feel like my ass is on pins and needles," she complained. "You get used to it," Jack laughed and propped it up. "Bring your helmet in with you. I don't want to risk it getting stolen." Rapunzel nodded and carried it with her into the diner. They went in and a sign said, "Seat yourself." "Before we sit, I really need to go to the bathroom." Rapunzel laughed. "You know what? That's a great idea." Jack headed to the bathroom with her. Jack walked into the bathroom and felt instant release as he went to the bathroom. He went to wash up and his face retorted into disgust when he looked at himself. He had bags under his eyes and his white hair was matted down. He had light stubble growing in, but he would take care of it later. He splashed water on his face and scrubbed it a little with the hand soap. When he walked out, he felt more refreshed and more awake. He saw Rapunzel sitting at a table alone and looking scared and awkward. You need to relax, Jack laughed. People are going to start to think you're crazy. She sighed and nodded. You're right. It's just, I'm sure my mom is up and has read my note. I am just worried she hates me now. She leaned in and whispered, What happens if they call the cops, Jack? They won't, he answered. And if they do, they won't ever catch us. Trust me. Rapunzel nodded and leaned back looking at her menu. I am starving. Me too, Jack agreed and opened the menu. In the end, they ordered 2 servings of pancakes, 2 servings of eggs, 2 orders of hash browns, toast, and bacon on the side. This is so much! Rapunzel laughed as she stuffed pancakes down her throat. We need it. Jack smiled and swirled his hash browns in ketchup. You eat your hash browns with ketchup? Rapunzel laughed. And my eggs! He smirked and squirted ketchup on his eggs. Why? Do you think it's gross? A little weird, but not gross. Rapunzel smiled. They ate breakfast in silence, just focused on eating as much as they could and drinking as much water and orange juice they could. Geez, you two can eat a lot, the waitress commented, picking up some of their many plates they had. I'm a growing boy, Jack laughed. I need my food. Rapunzel laughed and nibbled on her toast. The waitress dropped the check and Rapunzel reached for it. Nope, my treat. Jack smiled and snatched the check out of Rapunzel's hand. She frowned. Jack, we never discussed the money situation. Oh, I'm all set. I have more than enough to get across the country. Jack smiled. Well, how much do you have, if you don't mind? Rapunzel asked. And when Jack raised an eyebrow, she said, It would let me feel more at ease, Jack. Jack sighed. Fine. I have saved about $3,000 from working over summers and whatnot. You? Less than that, Rapunzel mumbled. I have about $1,500 from birthdays, holidays, chores. Guess I've never really earned my money. Well, it's something. So we have $4,500 and we are in Alabama right now, he told her, and pulled a map out of his back pocket. Where did you get that from? Rapunzel asked. I researched our trip before we started, Jack laughed. I'm not going to travel cross-country without researching it. So what did you come up with them? Rapunzel rolled her eyes and looked over at the map. Well, where your mother lives is literally on the top of California, right near Washington. We are going to have to go through a lot of states to get to California, Jack told her and pointed to the map. We are here. We literally just drive through states until we reach California. We go through Mississippi, then Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Texas, Rapunzel smiled. We can go see the Alamo. Jack rolled his eyes. Then we go through New Mexico, Arizona, and finally, we reach California. Now when we reach California, we will arrive in Fresno and go up the coast to where she lives. Perfect! Rapunzel smiled. Jack, I really appreciate this. You didn't have to do this. I know I don't, Jack smiled back. But I wanted to. This is my adventure too. And besides, gets us to really know each other. Rapunzel nodded. So, how long is this all going to take? If we didn't stop for anything, it would take about 1.5 to 2 days. But since I'm with you and because you're you, I'm assuming we will have to stop, see some things, spend the night somewhere, eat and whatnot. So I'm expecting we will get there in 4 to 5 days. Rapunzel nodded and drank the rest of her juice. Where do you want to reach by the end of today? Well, since we didn't really sleep, I'm not expecting us to get too far. We will both be pretty tired by early nightfall. I'm hoping to reach Arkansas by early tonight, but I won't be upset if we don't. All right, Rapunzel nodded. Ready? You know it. Jack smiled and put down the money for the bill and a tip. Jack smiled when Rapunzel seeked out the waitress and thanked her, and then followed him out to his bike. Jack could tell Rapunzel wasn't the biggest fan of his motorcycle, but she would get used to it. Besides, a motorcycle isn't as easy to track down if their parents did call the police. Ready? He yelled over the motor. Rapunzel nodded quickly and latched onto him. He secretly liked how tight she held onto him, her body melting into his perfectly. He started his bike and they rode out, Jack already knowing which way to go since he looked over the map before they started. He was really hoping to reach Arkansas by the end of the night, but he could already feel himself getting a little tired from driving all night.
Things went by smoothly for a long time. Rapunzel just latched onto him and him steering the way. They had already made it through Alabama and were already in Mississippi. It had taken a while since Alabama is such a square state. Jack was feeling the strain of traveling already. Ready for a break? Jack yelled to Rapunzel, who shook her head yes.
He pulled into a McDonald's that they saw a sign for off of an exit. McDonald's? Rapunzel's nose scrunched up. It's cheap and it tastes good. He rolled his eyes. Get a salad if you're so concerned. Rapunzel glared at him, but followed him inside. Jack had ordered about 3 burgers off the dollar menu, and Rapunzel just ordered fries and a burger. They sat, eating silently. I'm already tired, Rapunzel complained. Me too, Jack agreed. I wasn't expecting to be this tired so soon. We will drive a few more hours, then crash. Rapunzel nodded and sighed. So, what did you write to your parents? That I needed to help you with this because it's too dangerous to do it on your own. To trust me, and I will call them tonight and every day so they don't worry, he told her. Rapunzel nodded and smiled. Thanks. You? I wrote saying that I needed to do this because I feel like I'm missing half of myself. That if she stopped me, I would always wonder what could have been. Rapunzel told me and looked down. Jack, what if something bad happens? Like what? Jack laughed. What if we get robbed or like, what if we get shot at? Rapunzel's eyes widened. Jack cracked out laughing and had to wipe away tears. Rapunzel, we're not driving through the back alleys of Detroit. We're traveling on major highways and turnpikes. We will be fine. What if, like, someone breaks into our room when we're sleeping? Rapunzel frowned. Jack leaned forward and grabbed Rapunzel's hand. Rapunzel, I promise you that nothing will ever, ever, ever happen to you while you are with me. Okay? Rapunzel nodded and smiled, and Jack smirked. He really liked how much she was dependent on him, that he was protecting her, and she needed him. It felt good to be needed. How long have we been driving? Rapunzel asked over the wind. They had instantly gotten back on the road after lunch and had driven until it started to get dark. About 5 hours. We are almost into Arkansas. Jack yelled back to her, and he could feel her sigh. He could tell she was tired of driving, and he couldn't be more understanding. His back was killing him from being hunched over for so long. As soon as he passed the border into Arkansas, he immediately drove off the nearest exit looking for a hotel, stopping at the first one he saw. He pulled into the parking lot and parked his bike. Finally, Rapunzel moaned and hopped off, stretching her back. Tell me about it. Jack lifted his arms over his head and leaned to one side. Let's go crash. Rapunzel unlatched her backpack from the back of his bike and took Jack's bag too. He undid a tarp he had folded and draped it over his bike and latched it onto it. What's that for? Rapunzel pointed. In case it rains, bird shit, bugs, what have you, Jack listed off. When we get in, I just want you to let me do the talking, okay? Rapunzel nodded and walked into the hotel. It was a lot nicer on the inside than on the outside. Jack walked up to the front desk and put his helmet on the counter. Hello, the front desk man said. My name is John. What can I do for you? Hi there. We'd like a room. Jack smiled and took out his ID and debit card. Sure thing. John smiled and looked over Jack's ID and then pressed a couple of buttons on the computer. The room is $75 a night. That's fine, Jack told him. And John pressed a couple more buttons, swiped Jack's card, and then swiped 2 room keys. Here are your keys. Your room is 209, second floor. Complimentary breakfast is at 9 a.m. If you need anything, just call me. He smiled and gave Jack back his ID, debit card, and the door keys. Thanks, Jack smiled. Let's go. Rapunzel nodded, and Jack grabbed his helmet and they walked off to the elevators. Rapunzel waited and looked around and saw the sign for a pool. Oh, Jack, they have a pool! And it's only like 8. The pool closes at 10. Can we go? Rapunzel smiled at Jack and bounced up and down. Let's just get settled first and then we will see how we feel. Jack laughed. Frankly, I'm exhausted. They might have a hot tub, Rapunzel said in a sing-song voice. Very relaxing. Jack smiled and rolled his eyes. He knew he would go down there if she wanted him to. He knew deep down he would do anything she wanted him to do. They stepped into the elevator and Jack pressed the number 2 button to get to the second floor. So I thought you had to be 21 to rent a hotel room? Rapunzel asked him when the doors closed. Fake ID puns? Please? Jack rolled his eyes. How do you think I got alcohol for the other night? Weird to think that was only 2 days ago, Rapunzel mumbled. Do your parents know? I think so, but they've never asked me. Jack shrugged. The elevator pinged and they walked out. They walked down the hall until they reached their room. Here we are. Jack smiled and slotted his key through the doorknob. They opened the door and Rapunzel frowned. 1 bed? Jack's eyes raised. This should be interesting. Chapter 9. Rapunzel. Rapunzel took in a deep breath as she changed into her bikini. She wasn't about to waste a moment in the hot tub just because Jack might now want to. She could hear him on the phone with his parents. He wasn't yelling, and from what she could tell, they weren't too angry with him. He was just more assuring them that he was going to be fine and that they were fine. She heard him hang up, and she quickly put a sundress over her swimsuit. She didn't want to just walk out of there in nothing. He knocked on the door lightly, and she opened. "I take it you decided to go to the pool?" Jack laughed a little. "Yeah." Rapunzel shrugged. "I could use some relaxation right now. How did it go with your parents?" Jack shrugged. "All right. They aren't too pleased, but they know I'm going to be fine. They're worried about you too." Rapunzel nodded and got out of his way. "Well, do you want to come with me?" "Yeah," he said, holding up his board shorts. "Just let me change and get ready. Oh, and call your mom. Until you do, we aren't going anywhere near the pool." Rapunzel rolled her eyes and walked over to the bed as Jack shut the door. She was still kind of uncomfortable only having one bed, and she didn't feel right making him sleep on the floor or in a cot. Both of their backs were killing them, and they were sore from riding on his bike all day. "Make sure you dial *67 before you dial," Jack yelled through the door. "Why?" Rapunzel yelled back. "It blocks the caller ID so they can't track the phone number if they want to," Jack yelled back, and Rapunzel sighed and pursed her lips. She picked up the phone and pressed the buttons that sank her heart lower and lower in her chest. "Hello?" she heard her mother answer. She couldn't reply. She already felt the tears coming to her eyes. "Hello? Is someone there?" her mother asked more impatiently. Rapunzel still couldn't bring herself to answer. "I'm hanging up now," she heard her mother say angrily. "Mom, it's me," Rapunzel said quietly. "Rapunzel, oh my God, it's you!" she heard her mother yell happily, and then her voice turned sour. "Do you know how worried I've been? Do you have no heart? You gave me a fright. Where are you? I'm coming to pick you up right now." Rapunzel wiped away a tear. This isn't going the way she planned. "Mom, please calm down. I'm fine. I'm with Jack." "I know you're with that boy. Did he tell you to do this? I knew he was always a troublemaker," her mother yelled. "Whoa! First of all, you're the one who always said to be friends with Jack, and second, I'm not coming home. Can't you understand that?" Rapunzel cried into the phone. At the sound of her crying, Gothel calmed down a bit. "Rapunzel, you need to understand, this isn't a good idea. 2 kids driving halfway across the country to visit some woman you don't even know?" Gothel tried to reason with her. "Mother, I'm calling you to let me know I'm safe and that things are going okay. You need to understand that I need to do this. I feel like my life has been a big lie. I need to find this out,
And no one, not even you, can stop me. If you want me to call you every other day, I suggest you be a little bit more understanding." Rapunzel stood her ground. "I love you. Please know that, but I need to do this." Bye! Rapunzel hung up the phone with a bang and ran her hands through her hair. She took in a deep breath, closing her eyes. "You okay?" she heard Jack say. She looked up, saw him leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing a t-shirt and his board shorts. "Yeah, let's go." Rapunzel got up and walked towards him, grabbing their room key off the table. "Oh, hot!" Rapunzel pulled her toe out of the tub. She would be lying if she said she wasn't a little nervous to be half naked in front of Jack. Sure, she has worn her bikini to the beach before with her friends, and some of them were boys, but this was different. Her and Jack were doing this life-changing thing together. They were traveling across the country together. They were trusting each other. They were even sleeping together. She looked over at Jack, who pulled his shirt over his head, and Rapunzel stared while his eyes were focused on the hot tub. He was pale, that was granted, but his shaggy white hair and his abs were enough to make Rapunzel's knees buckle. "Ready?" He smiled, and Rapunzel brought her eyes back to his and smiled. Yeah," she muttered, still recovering from looking at his body. She walked over to the chair where he put his clothes and pulled her dress over her head. "Nice color." Jack smiled. Rapunzel smiled back, but she knew she was blushing. Her bikini was a deep aqua color that contrasted beautifully with her golden skin and sun-kissed blonde hair. Jack hissed through his teeth when he stepped into the hot tub. He moved to the other side and sat down. "Ah, that's the stuff." Rapunzel laughed and went in after him. Before she sat down, she tied her hair in a messy bun so it wouldn't get wet. She sat down across from him and sank down so just her head was above the water. "Oh my goodness, I needed this,"
She moaned and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she saw Jack looking at her. What? What did your mother say? Jack raised an eyebrow. That we need to understand that this is too much for two kids to do and that you're a troublemaker. Rapunzel smirked. Apparently, you were a bad influence on me. Oh, I know that. Jack grinned mischievously and ducked underwater. Jack? Rapunzel sat up. She saw him swim towards her and grab her thighs. What are you doing? She yelled as her head ducked in the water, and Jack stood up, flipping Rapunzel over his shoulder. Rapunzel coughed. You got my hair wet, you ass! Jack laughed and walked out of the hot tub with Rapunzel kicking and yelling at him. Put me down! No, Jack laughed. It's cold. Rapunzel smiled. As much as she hated this, she secretly liked it. The attention he was giving her. He walked to the edge of the middle of the pool. Ready? Jack laughed. Jack, I swear to God, Rapunzel yelled. But it was too late. Jack jumped into the pool and Rapunzel took a breath of air before they went under. Jack let her go in the water and she swam up. It's so cold, Rapunzel told Jack when he came up laughing. Am I corrupting you? Jack smiled. You're trying to kill me, Rapunzel chattered. She wished he did this before they got in the hot tub so the water wouldn't feel so cold. Don't be a baby. He splashed water in her face. You will get used to it. She smiled and splashed water back. How long can you hold your breath underwater? Jack asked. She smiled and sucked in air at the same time Jack did, and they went underwater. Rapunzel opened her eyes and ignored the feeling of chlorine on her eyes. She wanted to see this white, pale boy in front of her. She saw his eyes open too, and he smiled at her.
She smiled back and let bubbles come out of her mouth. She turned and swam towards the deeper water. She swam up when her lungs felt like they were going to burst. She reached the surface and sucked in air as she grabbed the wall of the pool. She heard Jack come up behind her and he swam next to her on the wall. Beat you. Jack smiled at her. By like a second, she smirked. She pushed herself up on the wall and climbed out of the pool. What are you doing? Jack laughed and propped himself up on the wall with his elbows. Pool jumps, duh! She smiled. She backed up a bit and then ran to the pool and did a cannonball. She loved the feeling of pummeling into the water and it being around her. She swam back up and smiled at Jack, laughing. I give it an 8.5. Jack smiled. 8.5, Rapunzel yelled. What was wrong with it?
Jack pushed himself out, and Rapunzel had to keep telling herself to not look at his body. Jack ran into the pool, and his splash covered Rapunzel, and she laughed. She held herself up by the edges of the pool, her back to it, and smiled when Jack came up. So? He slowly swam toward her. She could have given it a 10, but she wanted to push his buttons. 7 at best. What? Jack smiled. No way. I did better than you. I rocked this pool like I rock your world. Rapunzel smiled coyly and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. Jack, you may be better at this, but I assure you, I could rock your world in more ways than you even know. She could have sworn his eyes darkened over as he waded over to her. She took a deep breath as he swam in front of her and put his arms around her, grabbing the wall behind her. She was trapped in the space between his arms. He was dangerously close to her, and she didn't know if this was a good idea or not. Whatever was about to happen. They were traveling together. They were stuck together, and if something went wrong between them, then it could jeopardize the whole trip. But then Rapunzel thought to herself, she is being selfish. Jack is taking time out of his life to help her out on this amazing adventure. What if something went right? Rapunzel thought all of this in the 30 seconds before Jack looked down at his lips and then back at her eyes. She pushed herself into the wall to maybe put some more space between them, but Jack was already moving closer. Slowly. Ever so slowly. His mouth was only about an inch away when someone yelled at them. Hey, pool's closing! Rapunzel jumped and Jack turned around, glaring at the hotel employee that interrupted them. Get out! The guy yelled at them again. Okay, Jack yelled back. Jack turned back to Rapunzel, but he was surprised that she wasn't there anymore. When his back was turned, Rapunzel, very carefully, sank into the water and swam under his feet. She was already swimming towards the ladder. Jack sighed and swam after her and reached her as she climbed out of the pool. Here. The guy passed her a towel. He threw Jack's towards him and Jack caught it before it landed in the pool. Jack glared at the guy, who was very obviously gawking at Rapunzel. Thanks, she muttered, and walked over to her dress, throwing it over herself. She felt awkward with that guy watching her. He was very sleazy looking. He had greased back gray hair, and he had a gold tooth in the front of his mouth. He wore a uniform, but had a gold cross around his neck and a diamond in one ear. "What you doing around these parts, doll?" He smiled at her and leaned against the wall. "We're on our honeymoon," Jack answered him and walked up to Rapunzel, putting his shirt on. Normally, Rapunzel would have laughed at Jack saying that, but right now, she was grateful. "Honeymoon?" The guy laughed. "Aren't you two a little young to be married?" "Nope." Jack smiled smugly and draped an arm around Rapunzel's waist, pulling him closer to him. "Love knows no bounds." "All right," the guy smirked. "My apologies. You two have a good night." "We will." Jack guided Rapunzel by the guy, and they walked out of the pool area. He didn't let go of Rapunzel until they were in the elevator, and Jack pressed the button to go to their floor. They walked to their room in silence until Jack cracked a joke. "That guy looks straight out of an old thug movie." "Yeah," Rapunzel snickered. "Thanks, by the way, for rescuing me." "No problem." He smiled, and they walked into their room. "I'm gonna take a shower, do you mind?" she asked him, walking to her bag. "Not at all," Jack answered, and ran a towel through his hair to dry some of the extra water. "I'll take one after you." "Okay. Could you also take off the top blanket of the bed and put it somewhere else?" Rapunzel asked. "Why? Haven't you ever seen those shows about those things? They don't wash them. They're filthy," she told him with horror. "Someone's been watching too much Dateline and 60 Minutes, Jack muttered. "Jack! Oh my God. Fine," he rolled his eyes. "Go take your shower. I smell like the pool." I'm going, she told him, grabbing her shampoo and conditioner. "Today?" he asked, throwing himself in the chair next to their bed. "I'm going." "What's your problem?" she snapped, walking towards the bathroom and slammed the door. She couldn't believe his change in attitude all of a sudden. She turned on the shower and felt better as the hot water soaked her. She frowned when she heard Jack playing his music, interrupting her relaxing. What was his problem anyways? He acted so nice to her, putting his arm around her and protecting her from that creepy guy. Not just that, but almost kisses her in the pool. "Oh my God, he almost kissed me," she thought to herself. She completely had forgotten about it until now. Do I act like it didn't even happen? Do I ask him about it? Do I want to ask him about it? No. Leave it be. I can't believe he was going to kiss me. Do I want him to? I would if we were at home, not traveling together for the next week or two. Maybe after the trip. Rapunzel opened the bathroom door and steam rolled out. She felt clean and comfy in her pajamas now. She had been in her jeans since yesterday. She was ready for a bed, maybe even watch a movie. She had on her sky blue pajama pants that had little white dots over them. She just wore a black tank top with it. She lost the top that went to the pants a while ago, so now she just wore whatever top. "You look comfy," Jack smiled, watching Rapunzel get in bed. "I am," Rapunzel beamed. "What time is it?" 9 o'clock, he told her, and grabbing his clothes. "Want to watch a movie or something?" she asked, hoping he would say yes. "Sure, if you want, but don't be mad if I fall asleep in the middle of it," Jack told her, and shut the door to the bathroom. She heard the shower turn on and she flipped through the channels. Ooh! She smiled when she saw the movie Pretty Woman on VH1. She turned off the light and was curled up in bed when Jack walked out. Rapunzel didn't look at him until he was on the other side of the bed. He was wearing a plain black shirt and red plaid pajama pants. "You look clean," Rapunzel said quietly. She was starting to not like the effect he had over her. "Feel it," he smiled. "Mind if I hop in?" She blushed a little. "No." He grinned and pulled the blankets back and laid down, putting an arm behind his head and pulling the blankets back over him. "Pretty Woman? Interesting choice," he commented. "I love this movie," Rapunzel replied. It was at the part where Julia Roberts was shopping on Rodeo Drive and she had all the money to buy everything she wanted. They continued to watch in silence when Rapunzel heard Jack breath deeply. She looked over and saw that he had fallen asleep. He was on his side, facing her, hugging his pillow. Rapunzel smiled at how adorable he looked when he was asleep. She loved the way his hair fell into his face and how his eyelashes were long and resting against his face. He was breathing deeply and his lips looked soft. His lips looked soft. What is wrong with me? But she couldn't help it. She did want to kiss him. She was starting to like him, as much as she hated it. Nobody had ever sacrificed so much for her. He was doing this for her. No selfishness involved. She smiled and whispered, Jack, I'm only saying this because you are asleep, but I think I'm starting to fall for you and that scares me. She watched his face to make sure there was no movements indicating that he heard her. She sighed with relief when he wasn't awake. Good night, Jack. She rolled over and inhaled deeply, letting sleep take over her. Behind her, Jack opened one eye, smiled, and then went back to sleep. Chapter 10. Jack. Jack! Man, I could kill you! Hiccup yelled into the phone. Geez, calm down. Jack rolled his eyes. He took the moment to call Hiccup while Rapunzel was busy getting ready to leave. She had gone swimming before he got up, and when she came back, she needed to get into the shower before they left again. Jack, what could you possibly be thinking? You're missing all sorts of school. Not to mention you are traveling with a girl who supposedly hate, Hiccup reminded him. Hiccup, come on. Jack started, but Hiccup interrupted him. Don't, Hiccup yelled. This girl and you have never gotten along before. She's not just some girl, Hiccup, Jack threw back at him. Grateful Rapunzel couldn't hear him over the shower. You and her hate each other. No, I just don't even understand. What makes the difference now? It's just, Merida and I just don't even understand. You two can't even talk to each other before. Hiccup kept rambling. Well, maybe things have changed. Jack yelled into the phone, shutting Hiccup up. If you would shut the fuck up for a minute and let me speak, you'd know that maybe I don't want to hate her anymore, Hiccup. Maybe I am actually starting to, I don't know, like her. Jack waited for Hiccup to talk, but he could hear him breathing on the other line. Say something. Jack sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I'm just scared for you two, Hiccup finally answered. Merida and I are really worried. Don't be. I can do this. You know I can, Jack assured him. Besides, I promised Rapunzel I would be there for her and protect her no matter what. Well, that was a stupid thing to promise. Jack could practically hear Hiccup rolling his eyes. Why? What happens if something does happen? You can't do everything, Jack, Hiccup tried to tell him. Who says I can't? Jack retorted. I can do everything for her, anything she needs me to do. It sounds like you more than like her, Hiccup implied. So what if I do? Jack said without hesitation. He was surprised at himself for how quickly he answered, but he thinks he meant it. He really was starting to like Rapunzel, regardless of his stupid bet. He looked up when Rapunzel walked out and he smiled warmly at him. His smile was returned and she pointed at the phone. He held up a finger, signaling her for a minute. Hiccup still hadn't responded. Rapunzel just walked out of the bathroom. We have to get going, Jack told Hiccup. Well, where are you guys at least? Hiccup asked Jack, who looked at Rapunzel. Hang on a minute, Jack told Hiccup, and covered the mouthpiece of the phone. Puns? Yeah? She answered him. She had walked back into the bathroom, packing her toiletries. Come here, Jack yelled back to her. What? She walked out. I'm busy. Checkout isn't for another hour. You're fine. He rolled his eyes. Hiccup's on the phone. He wants to know where we are. Should I tell him? Can you trust him not to tell anyone? Rapunzel quirked an eyebrow. I think so, Jack answered and looked away from Rapunzel's gaze. Then go ahead. Rapunzel shrugged and walked back into the bathroom. You there? Jack spoke into the phone. Yeah. So? Well, I asked Rapunzel what she thought and... You asked Rapunzel? What are you? Married? Hiccup laughed. Shut up. Jack frowned. Do you want to know or not? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Hiccup apologized. How do I know you're not going to tell anyone? Jack asked. Because I know even if I tell someone and they chase after you, you're not going to stop, and I don't want you to get hurt. Hiccup told him. We're in Arkansas, Jack admitted. Jesus, that far already? Hiccup said with surprise. Hiccup, this isn't a joke or for fun. Rapunzel and I are in this for the long haul, Jack told him. Well, where are you in Arkansas? I'm not telling you that, Jack told him. I have to go. Jack, you can't tell me where you are in Arkansas? Hiccup asked. There is no point. We are about to leave in an hour. Jack rolled his eyes. I just wanna... Gotta go. Call you later. Jack hung up the phone. Is he worried about us? Rapunzel asked Jack as she walked out of the bathroom with her bag. Of course he is. Jack rolled his eyes and stood up. Jack felt anger fill inside of him and he kicked the dresser, leaving a crack in the wood. What was that for? Rapunzel frowned and walked to him. I'm just frustrated, Puns, he yelled and ran a hand through his hair. Everyone is just telling us how much we can't do this, how this is too dangerous for us, and how this is so stupid. Rapunzel tapped her foot and then walked over to Jack and wrapped her arms around his waist. He looked at her through his hair hanging in his eyes, and her breath caught a little, but she needed to cheer him up. I know this a lot for two kids like us to handle. She laughed quietly and he smiled. But I have not had any doubts about you and what you could do in the years I've known. I wouldn't want to be doing this with anyone else. I have faith in you. He smiled and bent his forehead against hers and breathed, thanks. She smiled back and let go of him to put her toiletry bag in her traveling bag. Ready to get moving? He smiled at her. She looked beautiful today. Her blonde hair wavy and flowy. She was wearing washed-out blue skinny jeans, black combat boots, and her black jacket. He liked the kind of darker look she was going with. Maybe he was rubbing off on her. He was wearing his black skinny jeans, a maroon button-down shirt with his leather jacket. You look good. Jack smiled at her. And yeah, let's get the hell out of Arkansas. Checking out you two? The front desk lady asked. Yeah, Jack smiled. All right. Who's the room under? She asked, typing on her computer. Mr. and Mrs. Frost, Jack told her, and Rapunzel had turned away to stop her from laughing. All right. You two have a good rest of your day, she smiled. And come again soon. Thanks, you two. Jack smiled at her, and he and Rapunzel walked out of the lobby. Ready for the open road? Jack smiled. Yes. Rapunzel smiled as they reached his bike. Jack smiled at her as he took off the cover of his motorcycle. He remembered what she said last night when she thought he was asleep about how she thinks she's falling for him and how his heart soared when she said it. It made him feel even worse about the bet when she said that. He was just going to cancel the bet. He was just going to tell Ruff no deal, and like hell, he was going to give Ruff his motorcycle. He would just tell Ruff he and Rapunzel were starting to have a relationship, and he can't jeopardize that with the bet. Rapunzel strapped her bag and Jack's bag on the back of his bike, and he mounted it. He loved the feeling of her getting on the motorcycle behind him and wrapping her arms around him. How far are we going today? He heard Rapunzel ask him. He looked over to her and she rested her chin on his shoulder. He smiled when she smiled back at him, her body pressed to his. I want to reach Texas by the end of tonight, so we are going all the way through Oklahoma on the I-40, he told her, and she smiled. Texas, here we come! Rapunzel punched her fists in the air. Woo! Jack yelled and smiled, turning on his bike, and they sped out of the parking lot. Want to stop for lunch? Jack yelled over the wind to Rapunzel, and she nodded. Jack pulled off an exit to Oklahoma City, and Rapunzel just took in the sights. It was gorgeous weather, and it was nice and warm. Where are we? Rapunzel asked Jack as he pulled into a parking lot filled with cars. Well, you said you wanted to sightsee, so I figured we could have lunch here. Jack smiled at her, turning off his bike and getting off his bike. Rapunzel didn't move, though. And here is... You didn't see the sign? Jack laughed. No, I was zoning out. Rapunzel looked around. She could hear people laughing and hear carnival music, like music on a carousel. Are we at a fair? Better. Jack smiled. Oklahoma City Zoo. We're at a zoo? Rapunzel smiled. I've never been to one. Well, let's go. Jack smiled. It's already 1 in the afternoon. If we are gonna see everything, let's go. Rapunzel jumped off his bike and he caught her laughing. He put the cover over his bike and put all their valuable in his pockets and Rapunzel's purse, which she crossed across her body. She grabbed Jack's hand and practically ran to the booth to buy tickets. Hi! Rapunzel smiled. 2 tickets, please. $16, the guy said unenthusiastically. Jack handed over a $20 and got his $4 back. Rapunzel tugged him again past the gates. Slow down, Jack laughed. You're gonna pop my shoulder out? Ha! They approached another gate where some workers were stamping people's hands, and you had to go through turnstiles. Rapunzel approached them with a smile, and they stamped her hand with a purple lion, and she went through the turnstile. Jack came up behind her, and she screeched, Oh my God! I see a giraffe! Rapunzel jumped up and down. Hang on. Jack walked over to an information stand and grabbed a park map. What is your favorite animal? Tigers? Rapunzel smiled. Then off we go. Jack held her hand and Rapunzel smiled. That was so much fun. Rapunzel smiled at Jack as she sat down with her burger. Jack had gotten pizza and a large fry for them to share. I take it you like the safari? Jack smiled. Yes. This has been great, Jack. Rapunzel smiled. How did you find this place? Just looked at some tourist attractions this morning on my phone, Jack told her, taking a bite out of his food. Aw, Rapunzel smiled. That's sweet. Jack rolled his eyes. Don't read too much into it. What? That you went out of your way to treat me to something nice? She smiled at him. I'm just saying it was nice. Jack was frowning, but then smiled. She was right. He did go out of her way to do something for her. What do you want to do after this? Rapunzel smiled. Eat up and you'll see, Jack told her. She did as he told, and she actually finished before him. Jack laughed as Rapunzel was trying to finish off the fries. Relax, he laughed. We aren't in a rush. I thought you wanted to leave soon? She told him, fries in her mouth. No, he shook his head. Why would I want to leave soon? Because you want to get as much distance as we can. Rapunzel, I want to get you there, but I'm not in a rush. We're already missing a lot of school as it is, so just enjoy the journey right now. He smiled at her and she beamed back. Jack finally finished eating, and Rapunzel was more than ready to see his next plan. This way. He smiled. I saw this, and I thought you'd want a memory. He walked up to a photo booth and Rapunzel climbed in and Jack followed her. I've never done one of these. She smiled. It was dark in the booth and she felt close to Jack being in such a small space. It's fun. He put the money in the machine, and the background option appeared. All right, pick the frames you want the picture in. There is a Justin Bieber-themed one. I'm all set with that one. She stuck her tongue out. Oh, this one. She selected the one covered in hearts. That one? Jack laughed and Rapunzel looked at him. Okay, fine. The camera appeared on the screen with an oval in the middle. We have to put our faces so they're in the circle. He smiled at her and she blushed. The screen counted down and it snapped a picture of her, surprising her. I wasn't ready, she yelled. Next one's coming, Jack told her. Make a face. They laughed as they stuck their tongues out and pulled their cheeks. The next one started counting down, and Rapunzel put bunny ears behind Jack's head, and Jack did the same. The last one popped up, and Rapunzel surprised Jack by kissing him on the cheek, and he put his arm around her back as she put her arms around his shoulders. He closed his eyes and savored the moment. Rapunzel pulled back and saw the screen saying, Wait for your pictures to be printed. Where do the pictures get printed? Rapunzel looked around. Jack was still distracted from Rapunzel kissing him. Yeah, it was on the cheek, but it was something. Huh? The picture. Where is it? She kept looking around. Oh, they print outside, he told her, and they climbed out. They glared at the sun from being in such a dark area. There they are. Jack squinted and pointed at the pictures sticking out. Rapunzel smiled and grabbed them. Ah, she squealed. We are so cute. Let me see. He took them, and he smiled. We are pretty adorable, he thought to himself. We make a pretty cute couple. The one where she was kissing him was his favorite. He was smiling and his eyes were closed with his arm around her, and she was smiling, kissing his cheek, her eyes closed, and her arms thrown around him. They looked like a happy couple, carefree, and in love. We are pretty cute, aren't we? He smiled at her and she ran into his arms and hugged him. He lifted her and laughed. I've had so much fun today. Thank you. She hugged him tighter. She let go and he folded the photos in half and started to rip them apart. What are you doing? You're ripping it! She yelled at him, and she looked at him with horror etched on her face. They split in half so we can each have one. He laughed and handed her a column. She watched him pull out his wallet and put it in a pocket. You're putting it in your wallet? She asked him. So I can always have it, he told her, and walked away. She smiled and put hers in her wallet too. Jack knew he would always carry it in his wallet so he could look at it. Hey! Rapunzel yelled out. He turned around and saw her holding her cell phone. I didn't realize I brought this with me. I thought I left it at home. She turned it on, and it immediately started buzzing. Jack laughed as it literally buzzed for about 5 minutes of texts, missed calls, and voicemails uploaded. Rapunzel eventually just threw it back in her bag and let it keep buzzing in there. That was so much fun! Rapunzel smiled. The zoo was closing, and everyone was leaving. Are you sure it's not too late, Jack? It's already 5, Rapunzel asked him. It was kinda late, but he expected it. We still have time to get to Texas. Don't worry, he smiled. We will be in Texas in about 5 more hours. We can make it. Well then, let's get going, she smiled. I'm getting tired. Jack could feel his eyes starting to strain, but he saw the sign of Texas only being 2 miles away. Jack, you're tired, Rapunzel yelled out to him. Let's just get off the next exit. No, I can make it, he yelled back, and she stayed silent. As soon as he passed into Texas, he pulled off the first exit he saw that advertised a hotel. They pulled into the parking lot of a Hilton, and Jack pulled into the first spot he saw. He slumped over when he parked. "I am so tired." "A Hilton? Isn't this kind of expensive?" Rapunzel commented, looking at the big tall tower. "You deserve nothing but the best baby." Jack smirked. "And I don't care. I am so tired." Rapunzel got off and grabbed their bags before Jack covered his bike. They walked into the lobby, and Rapunzel let Jack do the work like the previous night. "Hello? What can I do for you two?" the woman behind the desk said. "Hey, room for two, please." Jack put his helmet on the desk and brought out his wallet. "All right." She smiled and typed away at her computer. "I have a room for $200 a night.
What's the occasion?
That's fine." He yawned and looked at Rapunzel, who nodded.
We're on our honeymoon.
"Oh, congratulations."
Anywho,
"May I see identification and a way of payment?" she asked, her fake customer service smile plastered on her face. Jack handed over his ID and debit card, and she swiped his card after looking over his ID. "Here are your room keys." She passed over 2 room keys. "And here are some pamphlets about our
hotel and what luxuries we have here. If you need anything, just dial *9 on your phone and ask for Sandy. I will be at your beck and call.
Thanks." Jack smiled and grabbed his helmet and grabbed Rapunzel's hand.
What room are we? Rapunzel looked over at the keys. Room 507. Jack looked at them and punched the up key on the elevator. Top floor. Rapunzel smiled and bit her lip when Jack looked at her. He was leaning against the elevator door and was looking at her from under his eyelashes. He could practically feel the tension between them building each day. He didn't know if they could keep sleeping together without finally exploding.
The door opened, and Rapunzel walked by him, and he walked in after her. They reached their room, and Jack slid the key through the door. They walked in, and Jack smiled. "Now this is how the other side lives." Jack threw his bag across the room into the chair. He ripped off his jacket and unbuttoned his maroon shirt. Rapunzel took off her jacket, and she was wearing a deep purple flowy tank top. She undid her boots and watched Jack look out the window. "Can't believe I'm in Texas," he smiled. He turned around and walked at the bar that was in the corner of the room. "We have a bar? We aren't old enough." She looked at him, picking up a bottle of whiskey. "My card says I'm 21. He smiled at her. "Remember?" She smirked and stretched. In doing so, her shirt came halfway up her stomach, and Jack frowned. "You're still bruised." He pointed at her stomach. "Yeah, you didn't notice at the pool last night?" She walked over to the TV and turned it on. "I guess not." He shrugged. He was getting angry again. Angry at that fucker Flynn who hurt her. He walked over to Rapunzel, his drink in his hand and his shirt open, showing his chest. "Did he ever hurt you over the past years?" Jack asked her. Rapunzel's face scrunched at the smell of whiskey and shrugged. "I guess sometimes. It doesn't matter now." "Why not? How can you say it doesn't matter?" "He hurt you," Jack yelled. "Because I'm with you, Jack. And you told me you'd protect me no matter what, and you're never going anywhere. So yeah, it doesn't matter anymore." She yelled back at him, and Jack couldn't take it anymore. He dropped his drink on the ground and put his hands in her hair, pulling her lips to his, and kissed her. Finally. 11. Chapter 11. Rapunzel. Rapunzel couldn't believe that she was kissing Jack. Well, Jack was kissing her, but she wasn't saying no. She felt his hands in her hair, gripping her head, holding her to his lips. His lips were warm. She inhaled and took in his scent. She couldn't help it. She snaked her arms around his waist and hugged him closer to her. She wanted this. She's been wanting this since he asked her to go on this trip with him for her. She couldn't help but kiss him in the photo booth earlier. He was being so sweet to her and doing so many nice things for her. She just couldn't help but display some affection. Jack opened his mouth and traced her bottom lip with his tongue. Easing her, opened her lips, inviting him in with nothing but pleasure. She heard him moan in the back of his throat, and her knees buckled. Jack pushed her backwards until she sat on the edge of the bed. She moved backwards and he crawled over her, their lips never breaking. She kept backing up until she was at the pillows, and she eased herself down, Jack laying down on top of her, wrapping his arms over her shoulders and pushing his hands into her hair. She brought her arms around and ran her fingers through his hair. His hair was soft and silky. She kissed him harder, and she felt him smile. She knew this was going to come back and bite her in the ass, but she couldn't help it. She wanted this so much, and she was finally letting herself enjoy him. He pulled back, though, and rested his forehead against hers, breathing fast. Punz, I don't know if this is a good idea, he breathed, and her heart sank. She looked at him and frowned. Why? Because we still have to travel together, and I don't want you to feel obligated to be like a friends with benefits kind of thing with me, he told her, and she looked away. She felt like he just denied her. Okay. She sighed and pushed him off, and he did, rolling over onto the bed. I would hate to have you do anything you don't want to do. Rapunzel, that's not what I meant. Jack started. Save it. Rapunzel rolled her eyes and pulled her boots on. Where are you going? Jack asked, looking worried. Out, she huffed and grabbed her jacket. You don't have a car? He rolled his eyes. We are in a Hilton that has multiple bars and multiple things to do. You're exhausted, and I'd hate to keep you up. I'd hate for you to have to kiss my foul mouth, but I'm going to go out and have some fun. Rapunzel smiled, grabbing her purse and room key, and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. Compliments of the gentleman at the end of the bar, the bartender told Rapunzel. Rapunzel looked up at the cocktail in front of her, and she looked down the bar at two guys who waved and smiled. She smiled back and gave a small wave as thanks. She took the drink and downed it in 2 gulps. May I buy you another one? One of the guys who waved at her walked up next to her. Sure. She frowned and threw the olive back into her now empty martini glass. Another, please, the man told the bartender. What's your name? Rapunzel, she mumbled and choked down the drink the bartender gave her. Like the fairy tale? The man asked. Yeah, she sneered. Like the fairy tale? Well, I'm not. The man offered his hand. Rapunzel eyed it and decided that she was being rude and this man was just being nice to her. She shook his hand and finally got a good look at his face. He had brown hair that was shaggy and hung in his eyes. He had very kind brown eyes and a tan complexion. Nice to meet you. She brought up a corner of her mouth. Want another? Nod laughed, pointing at her empty glass. Sure, she slurred. She was starting to feel the alcohol get to her head. She was going to say no and go back to her room, but then she remembered Jack was in there, and he was the last person she wanted to see. Screw that. So, what brings you here? Nod asked, after they had been talking for a while. Rapunzel liked talking to him. He was very nice and he kept buying her drinks. She was surprised she hadn't been carded, but she wasn't about to bring that up with the bartender. Just on a trip, she said with a wave of her hand. Where are you going? California, she answered and smiled. I'm seeing my mother. I'm on my way to California too, he smiled. I live there. What brings you here then? Business, he shrugged. I have to travel for work. So, are you traveling with a friend? She looked at him, and all of a sudden a thought came into her head about advice her mother gave her a while back. When a man buys you drinks, he expects something in return. I'm with my husband, she told him, and looked down. Your husband? He blanched. Yeah, my husband, she nodded. Nod was silent for a moment longer, but she could practically hear his smile. Where's your wedding ring? I don't have one. She looked at him, and he had a shit-eating grin on. You know, you don't have to lie. He laughed. If you don't like me, you just have to say so. She's not lying. Rapunzel turned and saw Jack walk up behind her. Hello, dear. Hello, honey, she slurred and smiled. I can see you have been drinking. Jack pointed to the empty glasses in front of Rapunzel. Rapunzel didn't answer. Jack still had his shirt unbuttoned, and she just wanted to sink into his abs. I'm Nod. Nod held his hand out. Your wife was just telling me about you. Jack met his hand. And I'm sure she was. Want me to compensate you for getting my girl drunk? Nah, Pitch shrugged. It's always a pleasure to buy drinks for a lovely lady. Have a good night, you two. You know, you have some nerve. Jack hissed at Rapunzel, helping her out of her stool. I've got nerve, Rapunzel sang out and smiled. Jack sighed and helped her off of her bar stool. All right, it's time for bed, Jack told her, and she draped herself over his shoulders. You smell like alcohol. Rapunzel scrunched her nose as Jack pulled her out of the bar and towards the elevators. You're probably just smelling yourself, Jack laughed, but his breath reeked of whiskey. I don't want to go upstairs with you. Rapunzel frowned and pulled herself away from him. And why not? Jack frowned as he punched the elevator button. Because you don't even want me. You were just saying the whole friends with benefits crap to let me down easy. Rapunzel yelled at him, and his face fell. He was about to say something, but the elevator pinged. Just get in here? Jack walked into the elevator and Rapunzel stamped her foot, following behind him. The doors closed and Jack looked at her. Rapunzel, it's not that I don't want you. I just don't know if we are good together. You know? Why do you think that? Because we've hated each other forever? You're just scared and hiding behind your forwardness. You've already made it complicated, Jack. Rapunzel frowned. The elevator pinged on their floor, and Rapunzel stormed out and towards their room. She didn't know if Jack was following her or not, but she didn't care anymore. She also knew she had a lot of alcohol in her, but the pain Jack caused was still real. She opened up her heart and risked being with him, and he said no. She slid the key in the door and stormed in, slamming the door behind her. She heard Jack unlock, and he walked in too. "What are you doing?" Jack asked. Rapunzel was grabbing her bag. "I'm getting my own room." "Why?" Jack yelled. "Because I can't sleep next to you knowing there is this animosity between us." Rapunzel answered him. "Put that down! You're not going anywhere," Jack told her. But she didn't listen. "You can't tell me what to do," Rapunzel mumbled. "I'll text you tomorrow. I don't know if we can travel together anymore." "What?" Jack's face dropped. "Jack, I can't travel with you knowing that I like you," Rapunzel told him. "Puns, you're overreacting because you're drunk," Jack told her and ran a hand through his hair. "You aren't going anywhere. Now put your fucking bag down and get into bed with me and go to sleep." Rapunzel took a step back at the tone he used. Jack didn't even stall. He walked towards her, took her bag out of her hand and threw it across the room. "Hey, Jack! What do you—" Rapunzel started. Jack didn't even say anything. He just walked up to her and pulled her lips against his. She was confused and hurt, but happy, and she knew she liked this. She wrapped her arms around him, and he put his elbows over her shoulders and folded them up so that he was holding the top of her head. Wait, Rapunzel mumbled against his lips. "No," he shook his head. "Stop thinking so much. Just enjoy this trip. Enjoy being with me. Just live. We don't have to plan anything out. We don't have to label what we are. You like me and I am mad about you. Okay? Let's just enjoy today." Rapunzel already knew to say yes. He was seducing her to stay with him, and she knew it. But he was right. They were wild and carefree. They were traveling across the country and they cared for each other. What more did they need? Jack led her to the bed and laid her down, climbing on top of her, and they kissed their way into the night. 12. Chapter 12. Jack. Jack frowned deeply as he stared out the window of their bedroom. It was pouring rain and thunder crashed around him. There was no way they were going anywhere today. And of course, it had to rain the day they were in the most expensive hotel. "Well, it seems we aren't going anywhere today." Rapunzel came in bearing a huge tray filled with food. "So, I got us some breakfast." "Did you raid the buffet table?" Jack smiled and leaned over, kissing her deeply. She smiled and bit her lip when he pulled away. He loved the effect he had on her when he kissed her. He was still rather distraught what they were doing with their relationship, but for right now, he was just riding the wave and enjoying the ride. "A little." She crawled farther onto the bed. "Like I said, I figured we would just eat, lounge around, be a little goofy, take a day off." "That sounds nice." He smiled and grabbed a bagel off the tray, slathering it in jelly. "Jelly on a bagel?" Rapunzel raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Well, I eat something different on different bagels," Jack explained. "Like on plain bagels like this, I eat jelly. On sesame, I eat peanut butter. On everything bagels, I eat cream cheese." He stopped when Rapunzel started laughing. "What?" Jack looked at her in shock. "You are really that particular with your bagels?" Rapunzel laughed. "I know what I like," he told her, and then smiled. He was hoping she caught his double meaning, and when she smiled and blushed back, he knew she did. "So what else do you want to do today?" Rapunzel asked. "This place is huge. There is a casino, there is bars, there is some stores we could shop at. They have multiple pools and hot tubs." "Geez, you are going all out, aren't you?" Jack smirked, flicking through channels. "Well, how often are we going to stay in a place this nice?" Rapunzel smiled and jumped off the bed. "I'm going to go get dressed and ready." Jack smiled to himself, watching Rapunzel walk off towards the bathroom. He did like her, truly. He was just nervous about them was all. What he needed was Hiccup, someone to talk some sense into him. He picked up the phone and quickly punched Hiccup's cell phone number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hello? Hiccup, man. I am glad to hear your voice." Jack smiled. "Why?" Hiccup yelled. "What's wrong? Are you too hurt or in trouble?" "What?" Jack asked with shock. "No, of course not." "Oh." Hiccup sighed with relief. Good. What's up? Nothing much, Jack mumbled. But, something has kind of happened. What? Did you and Rapunzel, I don't know, hook up or something? Hiccup laughed loudly. Jack stayed silent and his lips set in a line. Jack, are you there? Hiccup spoke into the phone. Yeah, Jack mumbled. Oh, good. I thought you hung up.
No, yeah, that's what happened.
Jack rolled his eyes.
What do you mean? I mean, what you asked happened, Jack told him. I don't know how you want me to be any clearer. Whoa, wait! Hiccup yelled into the phone. You mean to tell me that you, Jack, hooked up with her? Rapunzel? Oh, for God's sake! Jack moaned. Yes, Hiccup. I don't know what else you want me to say.
Well, why, first of all, Hiccup sighed. Because I like the girl. Jack smiled when he thought of Rapunzel. Since when? Since I realized how beautiful and perfect she was. Jack's smile went wider. Sounds like you're falling in love, Hiccup sang. Maybe, Jack laughed. I gotta go. I just felt like talking to a familiar person. Where are you guys anyways? Texas. Jack looked out the window at the rainy sky. It's thunderstorms today, though. We aren't going anywhere today. Sucks, man. Call me later, Hiccup said, and then hung up. Jack held the phone a bit more, listening to the tone. He sighed and hung it up. He missed his friend. But this adventure was something else. It let him get to know Rapunzel more and did a great thing for them. He might now have a girlfriend. Maybe. Ready? Rapunzel came out and Jack gave a low whistle and placed his hand over his heart. You're trying to kill me. What? Rapunzel laughed and looked at him. She was wearing a tight black long-sleeve shirt with a tight dark purple miniskirt that ended mid-thigh with black lace tights and her boots. She wore a long chain necklace that had a sun pendant on it. Jack smiled and walked towards her. She had to avert her eyes if she wanted any hope leaving the room today. He was wearing a black t-shirt and just a pair of boxers. He leaned into her neck and kissed her, saying quietly, You look mouth-watering. I'll get ready. He let go of her waist and she went and sat down on the bed where he was laying. He walked into the bathroom and ran his hands through his hair and looked in the mirror. He looked more alive. His skin looked warmer than its usual paleness. His blue eyes were more clearer. He smiled, thinking Rapunzel probably had something to do with that. He could hear Rapunzel through the wall talking on the phone. He couldn't really make out the words, but he assumed she was talking to Merida. She wasn't yelling into the phone, so it wasn't her mother. He felt this giddy feeling inside of him. He felt like he was about to burst. He just couldn't wipe the smile off of his face. Can I get you two anything else? Their waiter asked them. No, thank you. Rapunzel smiled. Everything was divine. Thank you. We will take the check now. Jack smiled. Of course, sir. Their waiter smiled and walked away. Thank you for lunch, Jack. Rapunzel gushed. It was great. They had gone to one of the hotel's restaurants for lunch. It wasn't overly fancy, but it was enough. Jack was planning on taking her to the really rich restaurant tonight after they went out and bought the proper attire. Only the best for my lovely lady. He smiled and put his hand on top of hers and relished in the moment when Rapunzel's cheeks turned pink. What else do you want to do with your day? Jack smiled at her and grabbed the check when their waiter came by and dropped it off. My day? Rapunzel laughed a little. Why is it my day? Like you said. Jack put his debit card in the card slot in the check and put it on the table. How many times are we going to be in a place like this? So might as well make the best of it. Okay. Rapunzel smiled and watched the waiter take the check away. I would like to go and visit some of the stores. Sounds great. Jack smiled. What I have planned for tonight requires us to do some shopping anyways. Why? What do you have planned for tonight? Rapunzel asked. It's a surprise! Jack smiled and turned to the waiter who came towards them with the check and Jack's card. Thank you so much again. You did a fine job. Thank you, sir. The waiter smiled. You and your wife enjoy the rest of your honeymoon. Thank you. Rapunzel smiled and watched the waiter walk away. How did he know we are, quote, married? Told him when you were in the bathroom. Jack stuck out his tongue and smiled. I'm starting to think you really like the idea of us being married, Rapunzel teased. You keep telling everybody about it. So what if I do? He grinned wickedly. Well, for starters, we are only 17, Rapunzel joked. Speak for yourself. Jack got up and went around the table to pull out Rapunzel's chair for her. I'm 18. What? We are in the same grade. She got up and pushed her chair in while Jack put down a tip for the waiter. I started school late, he shrugged. Something about me not being mature enough to start school when I was supposed to. That sounds about right, Rapunzel joked as they walked out of the restaurant into the bustling halls of the Hilton, where people were milling around store to store. Jack could feel Rapunzel tense when he reached for her hand, but she relaxed as soon as he squeezed her hand. So, what did you talk to Merida about this morning? Jack asked her. What did you talk to Hiccup about? You. Ditto. Jack laughed and Rapunzel yanked on Jack's hand. What? He winced at his shoulder. You almost just popped my shoulder. Oh, shut up, Rapunzel rolled her eyes. They have a Hollister. I want to go in. Jack's face expressed pain as Rapunzel tugged on his arm to lead him forward. Ugh, do we have to?
Jack looked at the banner that read Hollister in big bold letters as she tugged him into the store. It was dark, and it had thumping music, and it smelled like very strong perfume. Jack gagged at the smell as Rapunzel floated from rack to rack, sorting through shirts and dresses. Puns, Jack mumbled. I don't want to be in here. Come on, Rapunzel moaned. If we are going to try this whole thing out, then we gotta make sacrifices. There is making sacrifices and then torture. Jack's nose pinched. This would look so hot on you. Rapunzel smiled and held up a light blue polo shirt that had the words Hollister written in big white letters down the side. Fuck no, Jack smirked. I wouldn't be caught dead in that shirt. Can you please just try it on? Rapunzel frowned and still held it out to him. Jack sighed and snatched it from her hands and walked towards the changing room. He walked into a changing room and sighed as he unbuttoned his purple shirt. He frowned even more when he pulled the blue monstrosity over his head. He straightened it out before he looked in the mirror. He turned and laughed at himself. Here he was, Jack Frost, wearing a blue polo and Hollister. He had to admit he did look rather dashing in it. The blue really brought out how white his hair is, and his blue eyes. He smirked as he walked out to see Rapunzel. He held out his arms and spun in a circle slowly. Ta-da, he sang, and Rapunzel jumped up, clapping. You look great. She smiled and ran up to him. Come on, even you have to admit it. All right, Jack laughed a little. But in my own defense, I make anything look good. Rapunzel smiled up at him and begged, Please let me buy it for you. You look great. Jack sighed and walked towards her and grabbed her waist. Anything you for you? Rapunzel's smile widened when he said that. He smiled back and walked back into the changing room to grab his other shirt. Rapunzel paid for the blue monstrosity and Jack wore the shirt out. I feel like a traitor, Jack mumbled, holding the straps to the Hollister bag that had a half-naked man on it. I am not a homophobe by any means. I feel like I'm gay. You're holding my hand. Rapunzel rolled her eyes. I'm pretty sure people will understand that you are not gay. They shopped for a couple more hours, Rapunzel pulling him to and from shops. But after Hollister, he didn't let her try on any more clothes. A man has to have his limits. You still need to buy a dress for tonight, Jack reminded her. Oh yeah, Rapunzel smiled. So what are we going for? Casual, black tie, or formal? They heard someone say behind them, and they turned around to see Merida and Hiccup walking towards them. They were too stunned to say anything. Aren't you going to say hello? Merida smiled. Rapunzel let go of Jack's hand and ran into Merida's arms. Oh my God, Rapunzel yelled. What are you two doing here? Yeah, Jack walked towards them. What the hell are you two doing here? You didn't mask the phone number when you called this morning, dummy. Hiccup slapped Jack on the back. So I contacted Merida and we pooled our money, booked a flight, and flew here in about 2 hours. You're a brat, Jack laughed and hugged Hiccup. It's good to see you, man. Hiccup smiled and hugged Jack back, but then let Jack go. And it's good to see you in preppy clothes? Shut it, Jack hissed. Seriously, man? Hiccup laughed. What is with the attire? I picked it out for him. Rapunzel walked over to Jack and put her hand on his bicep. I think he looks great. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Merida gestured to Rapunzel's hand on Jack's arm. What's with the PDA? What do you mean? Jack asked. Didn't Rapunzel tell you this morning? Tell me what? Merida raised her eyebrows and looked at Rapunzel. That her and I hooked up and we're together now? Jack laughed awkwardly. You didn't tell her? He asked both Hiccup and Rapunzel. No, Hiccup laughed. I thought she already knew. I was planning on telling her after I knew a little bit more of what we are, Rapunzel said quietly to Jack. Oh, Jack raised his eyebrows. My bad. We need to talk. Merida grabbed Rapunzel's arm.
Now! Chapter 13. Rapunzel. When were you going to bloody tell me that Mr. Snow and you are getting in on? Merida hissed at Rapunzel as Rapunzel sorted through clothing racks. You're acting like we're sleeping together. Rapunzel rolled her eyes. It's not like I planned it. Like you didn't plan this trip, Merida scolded. How do you think I felt when you just up and vanished in a day? Why are you making me feel so guilty? Rapunzel frowned. Because I'm your best friend. You should have told me you were adopted and confided in me. Instead, you just go and tell the boy who you have hated all your life. You confide in someone who barely knows you, and not only that, you guys travel halfway across the country. Oh, and to top it all off, you start playing tonsil hockey with the kid. Merida listed off, her face growing red with each word. I'm sorry, okay? Rapunzel threw up her hands. I don't know what else you want me to say. In case you haven't noticed, I have bigger things going on right now. Like the fact I have been lied to my entire life. The fact that my mother is out there somewhere and I need to find her. Jack was there for me at the right time and we just sort of, I don't know. It's complicated. Merida sighed and gave her a lopsided grin. All right. I guess I'll let you off the hook. Good, Rapunzel laughed. I don't deserve to be on the hook. Merida was silent for a moment, but then got a sly grin. So, how is he? Rapunzel blushed. We haven't done that, we've just made out and stuff. Stuff? Merida wiggled an eyebrow. Just stuff? Rapunzel laughed awkwardly. I don't know. Mostly dry humping, I guess. His lips, though. Oh my God. How's his body? Amazing! Rapunzel gushed. He is so intense. Well, clearly he has been rubbing off on you. Merida gestured to Rapunzel's outfit. What? Rapunzel looked at her clothes. I like this outfit. When have you ever worn black? Merida laughed. Don't get me wrong. I love the look. We just have a really good thing going on right now. Rapunzel shrugged. And I don't want to mess it up. As soon as she said that, Hiccup and Jack walked into the store and went up to them. Jack snaked his arm around Rapunzel's waist and pulled her close to him. What don't you want to mess up? Us, she told him. That's impossible. He smiled and then kissed her forehead. All right, Merida laughed. This is weird. Why? Jack asked. Because? Hiccup laughed awkwardly. All we have known our whole lives up until now is you two hating each other, and now you guys are like, what are you? A couple? Jack and Rapunzel looked at each other and shrugged. We're not sure, Rapunzel told them. You're not sure what you are? Merida quirked an eyebrow. Can we please stop talking about this? Rapunzel pleaded. What Jack and I are doing is our own business, and it may be weird to you two, but it feels right to us. Okay, Merida sighed. Sorry. It's just a little weird to us because we haven't been here the whole trip. We're just happy you two are happy. Hiccup smiled. I am happy. Jack smiled and squeezed Rapunzel into his side. Now that this whole drama is out the way, Rapunzel and I have more shopping to do for tonight. Would you two like to join us? What are we doing? Hiccup asked. A surprise. Jack smiled at them. I don't want it to be ruined for Puns. So, Rapunzel, your job is to go and get yourself and Merida dresses. Like nice dresses? Rapunzel asked. No, I want you to dress to the nines. Jack smiled. I'm talking fancy. This is a black tie event. Okay, Rapunzel laughed. It can't be too expensive, though. We are on a budget. Puns, we will be in California in 2 more days. Jack rolled his eyes. Yeah, but then we have to travel back, Rapunzel reminded him. Would you stop and just go and have fun? Jack laughed. Leave the worrying to me, okay? I said I would always take care of you, didn't I? Yes, Rapunzel huffed. Then stop arguing and go. Jack laughed. Okay. Rapunzel turned to go, but Jack grabbed her hand and pulled her into a kiss. Rapunzel smiled as he pulled away. Now go. I want you to be ready in our room at 8 o'clock with Merida. You mean I'm not seeing you until 8? Rapunzel frowned. It's 4 hours. Jack smiled. As much as Rapunzel hated to admit it, she was used to having Jack around, and she was a little sad he wouldn't be with her. What if I need you? Rapunzel tried. Stop trying to get me to stay with you. Jack laughed and kissed her again. You're going to be fine. All right. Rapunzel smiled and kissed his cheek. See you tonight. Rapunzel smiled and waved at Jack as her and Merida walked away. A little codependent, are ya? Merida smiled coyly. No. Rapunzel shook her head. I just have gotten used to him. We have been together for the past 3 days for a full 72 hours. I just feel a little weird without him being around. It sounds like you are more in love instead of just liking each other, Merida teased. Maybe, Rapunzel blushed. All right, let's go get these dresses. This makes me look like a huge pumpkin. Merida frowned herself in the mirror. Rapunzel laughed at her. Indeed, she did look rather huge. She was wearing a big orange ball gown, and it made her look like a pumpkin. It's the great pumpkin Charlie Brown, Rapunzel laughed, pointing at her. Shut it! Merida frowned and walked back into her dressing room. Rapunzel smiled as she watched her friend go in her changing room, and then frowned at herself in the mirror. She still hadn't found anything. She wanted to wear something that would make Jack's jaw drop, but she couldn't find anything. She didn't even know what his favorite color was. Hey, Merida! Rapunzel yelled to her. Yeah? Merida huffed. Rapunzel imagined she was trying to get out of her dress. Do you have Hiccup's number? Yeah. Why? Can you text him and ask him to find out what Jack's favorite color is? Rapunzel asked. She heard Merida dig into her bag, and then about a minute later she answered, It's blue. I don't know why you didn't know that. Kind of obvious. Shut up. Rapunzel rolled her eyes. You didn't know either. Rapunzel went out and kept looking at dresses. She frowned as she quickly looked through them on a rack. Can I help you with anything? She jumped at a woman's voice. She turned and saw a very tiny woman with colorful short hair. Rapunzel mumbled. She was tempted to say no, she had it under control, but who was she kidding? Actually, yes. I can't seem to find a dress, Rapunzel answered. Oh? The lady smiled. Well, I'm Miss Tooth, and trust me, I am an expert at finding the perfect dresses for the right women. Good! Merida huffed and emerged from the dressing room in a poop brown-colored dress that had glitter all over it. We certainly need it. Rapunzel cackled with laughter, and Miss Tooth coughed and covered her mouth. It would seem so, my dear. So what color are we looking for? Miss Tooth asked Rapunzel. Blue, I guess. Rapunzel shrugged. I think you would look slightly better with a light purple of some sort. Miss Tooth smiled. Oh, I know. Rapunzel rolled her eyes. It's for a stupid boy I'm trying to impress. Ah, Miss Tooth smiled. Young love, nothing quite like it. It's not love, Rapunzel smiled. Just getting to know each other. Miss Tooth smiled. Well, whatever you want to call it, your eyes have a sparkle to them. So, where are you guys going? We're not really sure, Merida spoke up. Jack just said we have to dress very nicely and be ready at 8. That gives us plenty of time, Miss Tooth smiled. Miss Tooth, Rapunzel spoke. Please call me Anna, she smiled. Anna, Rapunzel smiled. I want to be perfect for him. It will be hard, Anna told, and Rapunzel frowned. To make something already perfect even more so. Rapunzel beamed, and her, Anna, and Merida took off towards the dress racks. Anna really has great taste. Merida smiled at herself in the mirror and did a twirl. Her dress was a silk, very dark burgundy. It had thick straps and the neckline scooped low, but low enough for it to still be modest. It reached the floor, and it trained behind her a little. She also had straightened her hair, and she didn't realize that her hair was like 6 inches longer than it was when it was curled. I feel so nervous, Rapunzel called from the bathroom. Merida rolled her eyes and opened the bathroom door. They are going to be here any minute. Get your cute little butt out here now. Fine. Rapunzel frowned and came out. Her and Merida basically traded hairstyles. Rapunzel's was curled into tight little tendrils that felt soft to the touch. You look gorgeous, Merida smiled at her friend. Rapunzel was a light blue lace dress that hugged her every curve. It was strapless, and she was actually pleased it showed off what little breasts she had. She had her makeup done at a beauty salon earlier, so it was flawless. She had a smoky cat-eye thing going on, and her cheeks had a lovely color to them. You're one to talk, Rapunzel smiled at her friend. You're just as beautiful. They turned to the door of Rapunzel's hotel room when they heard a knock. They're here, Merida squealed and composed herself before answering the door. To her surprise, it was room service. Yes? Merida frowned. She was hoping it was Hiccup. They weren't official or anything, but she liked to think this was a double date. I was informed to tell you ladies that your dates are waiting for you downstairs in the bar, he told them, and smiled. They told us to meet them here, Rapunzel commented, pulling on her high heels. Those are my orders, ma'am. He smiled even more when he saw Rapunzel. The two gentlemen sent me up here. All right, Rapunzel shrugged. Let's go. They are right in there, the man told them. If you need anything else, just ask for Fish Legs, that's my name. And ladies, let me just say, those are two very lucky guys. Thank you. Merida smiled and Rapunzel waved goodbye. Ready to see our dates? Rapunzel smiled. More than ever. Merida gathered her dress and they walked in. There they are! Rapunzel pointed to the two of them. They were sitting in armchairs talking to other men. They had whiskey glasses in their hands and they were decked out in suits. Rapunzel was nearly drooling at the sight of Jack. He had taken out all of his piercings, but his white hair was still crazy. He was wearing a black suit with a black shirt and even a black tie. All of the black made his features stand out even more. They walked up to their date slowly, and when they approached them, they still hadn't noticed the girls. Seriously? Merida huffed. Rapunzel was not going to stand there and just wait for them to notice her. She had spent the past 4 hours getting ready for this. Excuse me, gentlemen. Rapunzel smiled and they turned to face her. I believe I have a date with Jack. Jack smiled at her, his eyes glazing over as he took her in. He sauntered over to her and wrapped his arms around her. Look at you. You are mouth-watering. She smiled and gladly let him parade her around like a trophy. Rapunzel, let me introduce you to some friends I have made. Jack gestured to the group. That is Mr. Aster Bunnymund, and this is Mr. Sandy. A pleasure to meet you both. Rapunzel smiled at them. The pleasure is all ours. Aster smiled and grabbed her hand, placing a soft kiss on it. His accent was a very thick Australian accent. I agree. Mr. Sandy smiled. Jack here was just explaining why you guys are in town. Congrats on the marriage. Marriage? Rapunzel heard Merida laugh quietly behind her. It has been a rather lovely honeymoon. Rapunzel smiled and placed her hand on Jack's chest. So young, Aster commented. What made you take the plunge, Jack? Jack shrugged sheepishly and smiled. When you know, and I knew I wanted this lovely girl to be mine forever since the first day I saw her. Rapunzel looked at him and smiled. What he said was so sweet. She wondered if he actually meant it. Now, if you don't mind, gentlemen, we have reservations to make. Jack smiled and placed his hand on the small of Rapunzel's back. It was nice to meet all of you, Rapunzel smiled. Jack quickly downed his alcohol, and they walked out of the bar. Merida, you look divine also. Jack smiled at Merida. Thanks. She smiled back, but her attention was focused on Hiccup. He was equally as enraptured with Merida. So, where are we going? Rapunzel asked Jack. Well, first we have to take a ride to it. Jack smiled at her and he held the door open for her as they stepped outside. A black car was waiting for them out in front. It was still slightly raining, so Rapunzel was happy she was under an awning. She smiled as the driver opened the door for them, and they slid in. The car had seats that faced each other, so they luckily weren't all cramped into one seat. A bottle of champagne for my girl. Jack smiled and popped the bottle, pouring some into a glass for her, Hiccup, Merida, and himself. Jack, I don't know where we are going, but I am so glad I am going there with you. Rapunzel raised her glass to him. You are just so amazing. He smiled back and clinked his glass against hers. Rapunzel, I promise you, you will never forget this night. Chapter 14. Jack, so where are we going? Rapunzel smiled. I told you it's a surprise. Jack smiled back and held her hand. He was dying to tell her what they were going, but he really wanted to keep it a surprise. He wasn't going to tell her how much trouble he went to set this all up. Rapunzel was practically bouncing in her seat. While she looked out the window, Jack took the opportunity to gaze upon the girl sitting next to him. She looked flawless. He loved how she picked out a dress of his favorite color and how her hair was curled. She was mouth-watering. He knows how he told her he didn't really want to label what they are, but right now, he was ready to spend the rest of his life with her. Don't get too far ahead of yourself, Jack thought to himself. Just be happy she's yours. But she's not yours, because you told her you didn't want to define anything. You're so stupid. Why did you even say that? Because the last time you had a girlfriend, she went post-apocalyptic on your ass. But Rapunzel isn't like that. She's different. She's breathtaking. But you barely know her. Jack focused his attention on his date sitting next to him. Rapunzel was busy looking at all of the buildings they were driving by and pointing at various things that caught her eye. He smiled and just studied her face. When did she become this beautiful? When had she matured into the gorgeous girl sitting next to him? All the years living across the street from her. All he can remember was them hating each other. And for what reason? He can't even remember anymore. Maybe he only pretended to hate her. Only pretended because that was the only way he could be near her. She hated him for so long that he was desperate for any kind of contact with her. He remembers he started to feel feelings for her the first day of sophomore year. He was putting gel in his hair, and he turned around to face his window when he saw her in nothing but her bra and panties dancing around to whatever pop song was playing on the radio. He remembers wanting to go over there and wanting to kiss her. It struck him weirdly at first, and he walked away. But watching her dance around in her PJs or underwear became a morning ritual for him. He loved watching her dance. He would even wait for her. He knew she saw him too, in either just his pants or boxers. He didn't know if she liked it just as much as he did, but judging by the way she's been all over him lately, he figured yes. "We're here!" Jack smiled and squeezed Rapunzel's hand. She smiled as their door was opened for them. Merida and Hiccup, who were more than infatuated with each other right now, filed out first, and Jack followed after them. He extended his hand to Rapunzel and helped her out. They were under an awning, thankfully, shielding them from the rain. Rapunzel smiled as the car drove away, and the door was opened for them. They walked in, and Jack had his hand on Rapunzel's lower back. They were on the second floor of a circular room. It had chairs and tables that surrounded the second floor, and then a staircase in front of them that went to the bottom floor that held a stage and circular tables that surrounded the stage. "This way." Their hostess smiled at them and walked down the stairs. Jack watched as Rapunzel looked around at the people. The place was mostly filled. Jack was thankful he called earlier. They were sat at a table to the right of the small stage where a woman was singing a song about a man cheating on her. Jack loved the dark, cozy feeling this place had and was grateful people were dressed as elegantly as they were. "Could I get any of you drinks?" Their hostess smiled. "Jack Daniels, please." Jack smiled at her, and their waitress blushed. Rapunzel frowned and grabbed Jack's arm. "Honey, you order for me. You know what I like." His eyes twinkled at her, and he turned back to the waitress. "Fireball whiskey and ginger ale, please." The waitress nodded her head, and Hiccup and Merida ordered their drinks. "Getting a little possessive?" Jack laughed at Rapunzel as when their waitress walked away. "I don't know what you are talking about." Rapunzel looked towards the singer. Jack smiled at her and sighed. Tonight was going to be "I tell you, this one cannot handle flying." Hiccup laughed and pointed at Merida. "Oh, get off of it," Merida yelled at him. "It was my first time." "You've never been on a plane?" Jack laughed at her. "How is that even possible? You have 3 brothers. You and your family never went to Disney or something?" "Of course we did." Merida rolled her eyes. "We just drove there. We live 1 state over. No sense in driving. Believe me." Rapunzel looked at Jack. "It is not fun being in a car with that lot for hours on end driving to New York City. It's exhausting. You went for free." Merida smiled. "Stop your complaining." They all turned to the stage when a man approached the mic and made an announcement. "It's open mic night for those who can actually sing." His joke earned him a laugh. "For those who are brave enough, raise your hand."
"Oh, Rapunzel, you should go." Merida smiled. "No, thank you." Rapunzel laughed awkwardly. "I didn't know you could sing." Jack smiled at her, but then became a little sad. He really didn't know a lot about her if he really thought about it. He did know that he wanted to be near her always. "Come on." Merida rolled her eyes. "Do it." "I dare you." Rapunzel huffed and glared at her friend. What just happened? Hiccup looked between the 2 girls with a terrified look on his face. "She can't turn down a dare, and we both know it." Merida smirked and yelled to the announcer. "She'll go." "Come on up." He smiled at her. Rapunzel threw her napkin down on her plate and walked over to him. The man held out his hand out for her and she grabbed it as he helped her on stage. "Do you know what song you want?" He smiled at her. "Our band can find the sheet music for anything."
She looked over at Jack, who was smiling at her. "Yes, I know. Okay, bear with me." She smiled shyly, and several people clapped and cheered for her. She sighed as the piano behind her started and the violinists began to play. She hummed into the microphone, closing her eyes and swaying to the music. "I've seen the world, done it all. Had my cake now. Diamonds, brilliant, and Bel Air now. Hot summer nights, mid-July, when you and I were forever wild. The crazy days, city lights, the way you'd play with me like a child. Jack could feel his breath shaking as Rapunzel's voice floated around the room with ease. Everyone was mesmerized by her. His breath caught when she looked over at him and smiled. He couldn't take his eyes off of her full pink lips that released the voice of an angel. Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Will you still love me when I've got nothing but my aching soul? I know you will. I know you will. I know that you will. Will you still love me when I'm no longer beautiful? I've seen the world, lit up as my stage now. Channeling angels in the new age now. Hot summer days. Rock and roll. The way you play for me at your show and all the ways I got to know your pretty face and electric soul. Will still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Will you still love me when I've got nothing but my aching soul? I know you will. I know you will. I know that you will. Will you still love me when I'm no longer beautiful? She smiled and started to snap her fingers as she moved her body in a small wave. People smiled and laughed quietly at her little flair. Merida wasn't watching her friend, though. She was watching Jack. She was suspicious about Jack liking her friend. Up until now, however, the way he was looking at her, she was surprised that they weren't really married. He looked like he was in love. Dear Lord, when I get to heaven, please let me bring my man. When he comes, tell me that you will let him. Father, tell me if you can. Oh, that grace. Oh, that body. Oh, that face makes me want to party. He's my son. He makes me shine like diamonds. Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Will you still love me when I've got nothing but my aching soul? I know you will. I know you will. I know that you will. Will you still love me when I'm no longer beautiful? Will you still love me when I'm no longer beautiful? Will you still love me when I'm not young and beautiful? She smiled and ended the song and let the piano trail off. Applause thundered through the club, and Rapunzel blushed. Rapunzel gave a small wave as she walked off the stage, but she didn't get far. Jack was right there waiting for her and lifted her off the stage and hugged her tightly. He let her go to kiss her deeply, and she smiled. You are the most incredible person I have ever had the privilege of knowing, he breathed, and she smiled. You aren't too bad yourself, Mr. Frost. He smiled and let her go, and they walked back to their table. I had no idea you had such a powerful voice, Punzi. Hiccup smiled at her. She doesn't like to sing regularly, Merida smiled. But I force her. Rapunzel stuck her tongue out and looked over at Jack, who was leaning back in his chair and had his hand resting under his chin, just admiring her. What? She smiled. I think, Jack sighed, swallowing what he really wanted to say, and smiled. I'm just so happy to be here with you right now. Me too. She smiled, and went back to talking to Merida. I am pretty drunk. Rapunzel smiled and leaned against Jack as he guided her into their room. His arms were wrapped around her, and his chin was on her shoulder. I can see that. He laughed and shut the door behind them. Get me out of this thing. She gestured to the zipper, and without thinking, he just went over and unzipped her dress. She let it fall to the floor and picked her feet out of it. She shook out her hair and raised her arms to stretch. Meanwhile, behind her, Jack's eyes doubled in size, taking in the sight before him. She was wearing a strapless black lace bra and a matching black lace thong. She still had on her black strappy high heels and all of her jewelry. He hated to compare her to one of those girls in a nude magazine, but man, did she look the part. She was jaw-dropping. She turned and smiled when she saw him looking at her. Like what you see. I've seen it before. He tried to throw back. I know you have. She smiled coyly. I've seen you watching me get ready for school in the mornings. I'm not blind. He blushed a little at her admitting that she has seen him watching. But you've never had it up close and personal. She smiled and sauntered over to him. His breath caught and he tried to keep his poker face. Don't act like you aren't affected by me. She smiled and wrapped her arms around him. He still remained stone-faced and just watched the girl in front of him try to tempt him. She smiled and walked away from him towards the bed. She walked over to her bag and grabbed her cell phone. She walked over to their bed and dropped her phone. Oops. She smiled and bent slowly down. She kept her legs straight and slowly bent back up. You don't know what game you are playing, Jack said in a hoarse voice. Baby, I've won the game before it even started, Rapunzel laughed. Before she could even say another word, Jack had flipped her around and backed her onto the bed. He kissed her hard and rubbed his hands up her body and into her hair. She sighed and started to unbutton his white dress shirt. She quickly took it off his shoulders and he relished in the feeling of feeling her chest underneath his. He wanted her so badly, but he had to tread cautiously. She was new to all of this and he didn't want to overstep any boundaries. He just couldn't believe this girl was his. But she isn't yours, remember? Rapunzel, he choked out and rested his forehead against hers. I need you to be mine. I know I said I didn't want labels and whatever, but I need you to be mine. I can't imagine not being around you anymore. Please, just be mine. He saw her smile, the moonlight bathing her. Jack, of course. I adore you. I've been yours since the day you insulted my room in 2nd grade. He laughed and kissed her again. I think I love you, Punz. She didn't answer him at first, but just stared at him. He began to panic. Say something, damn it. I think I love you too, she finally answered, and he kissed her again. Don't ever go away. No, I promise. He kissed her and shook his head. I'm never going anywhere. Good morning, lovebirds. Merida smiled at Jack and Rapunzel, who joined them at their breakfast table. Late morning. You could say that. Jack smiled. He wasn't about to tell them that Rapunzel and him had a late morning due to the fact that they were too busy with each other's company in bed. One can only guess, Hiccup smirked. Little did Jack and Rapunzel know that Merida and Hiccup had a little fun of their own last night. So how is this going to happen? Merida asked Jack. How's what going to happen? Jack smiled. Well, you only have your bike, and there is Hiccup and we can't fit on it with you. She laughed. Jack's eyebrows furrowed. Because you two aren't coming with us. What are you talking about? Hiccup asked. Of course we are. No, you're not. Rapunzel shook her head. When did we agree on this? When Hiccup and I showed up. Merida pointed at Hiccup. We didn't agree to that, Jack told her.
It was a silent agreement. Hiccup threw back. You can't just have us silently agree. Rapunzel told Hiccup. That's not fair. Oh my God, Jack moaned. This conversation is idiotic. You two aren't coming. We have no room and you two have lives at home. And you two don't? Merida threw back. How do you think we felt waking up the next morning to discover that our best friends had vanished in the middle of the night? We had to comfort both of your parents, not to mention put up with all the rumors at school about you two. There are rumors.
Rapunzel frowned and looked over at Jack, who just huffed and rolled his eyes. If it makes you feel any better, most of them were started by that awful Flynn. Hiccup gave her a sympathetic smile. What have people been saying? Rapunzel asked in a fear-filled tone. Hiccup looked at Merida, but she was too angry right now to spare their feelings. That you are knocked up with Jack's kid, that you've cheated on Flynn this entire time with Jack, that you two were caught with drugs, and so on and so forth, Merida listed. Rapunzel's eyes were filled with tears. She pushed her chair back and ran out of the dining room and back to their room. Was that really necessary? Jack glared at Merida. She asked, Merida spat out. If there was any chance of you two coming with us before, Jack told them, getting up. You sure blew it now. Rapunzel, don't pay any attention to what Merida said, Jack called out to Rapunzel. She was busy getting ready in the bathroom to head out. Outside was nice and sunny, so they were heading out soon. He knew she was still upset. She finally came out of the bathroom and he smiled at her. She was just wearing a blue t-shirt with their school mascot on it, torn jean shorts, and her black motorcycle boots. He long blonde hair and a messy bun on top of her head, and she wore black eye makeup. You look gorgeous. He smiled at her, and she gave him a small smile back. Still upset. She nodded and sighed. It's going to be hard when we go back home. We'll just think of it this way. Jack smiled at her. When we do go back, people are obviously going to see you aren't pregnant, and you can put down the rumors yourself. Let the peanut gallery have their fun right now. She nodded. You're right. I guess I'm just more hurt that Merida was so cold and short with me. She's just upset because I told them they can't come with us. Jack rolled his eyes. Frankly, he was almost contemplating smacking some sense into Merida. But for one, he doesn't hit women, and two, Rapunzel would have killed him. Are you sure they can't come with us? Rapunzel looked at him with big, sad eyes. Jack frowned and looked at her. Where are they going to sit? On our shoulders? Maybe they can rent a car, Rapunzel tried. You have to be 25 to rent a car, he told her. It wouldn't hurt to ask them what their plan was. They must have one, Rapunzel suggested. Rapunzel, I said no, it's too risky, Jack yelled, and he looked at her with angry eyes but then softened. She had a terrified look on her face. Oh, baby, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell at you. Why don't you go and just finish getting ready? Rapunzel choked out and walked over to the phone. I need to call my mother. He frowned and grabbed his clothes, walking into the bathroom. Way to go, dumbass. Finally making some progress with her, and then you go and scare the shit out of her. He got dressed in his torn black t-shirt and dark blue jeans and his black high tops. He was about to put some gel in his hair when he heard Rapunzel crying into the phone. He opened the door and walked out. Her back was to him, and his heart broke when he heard her. "You don't understand," Rapunzel cried into the phone. "You don't know everything. Why would you listen to the rumors?" He could hear her mother shouting into the phone from the other side of the room. "I know he loves me. You don't even know him." Rapunzel wiped away a tear. But, would you please listen? Enough of this shit." Jack walked over to her and ripped the phone out of her hand. "Listen, Gothel!" Jack shouted into the phone. "If you have something to say about me, say it to me. You little hoodlum, you are a bad influence on my daughter. You have taken away from her studies, her home, filling her head with nonsense of love, and taking her on a dangerous trip with no guardians." Gothel yelled at him.
You are not who I thought you were. You are lucky I haven't called the cops yet. If you took your head out of your ass for one moment and got to know what your daughter's life is like and what she wants, you would know she confided in me. She could have said no to this trip. I didn't talk her into anything. And as for me not loving her, you don't know me at all. I would die for this girl. I would do anything it takes to protect her and make sure she's okay. You're the one that hid her from the truth and drove her away, so stop making this out to be like she's the bad guy. I'm in this for the long run, Gothel. I love her, and I'm not going anywhere. Jack slammed the phone down and breathed fast, his fists clenched. Rapunzel was instantly at his side and wrapped her arms around him. He sighed and hugged her back. "Thank you," she said into his chest. He smiled and pulled her head back to kiss her. "I love you," he smiled. "Ditto," she said, and he laughed. "Ready to go?" "More than ever," she smiled. "Let me just go fix my makeup. My eyes are all raccooned from crying." "You still look gorgeous," he told her as she walked into the bathroom. He grabbed his helmet and his backpack. He wasn't even going to say goodbye to Merida and Hiccup. He was hoping to avoid them at all costs. He couldn't afford to have two people trailing behind them. He wasn't about to risk his trip with Rapunzel, their trip getting to know each other and be close by traveling with the two nosiest people. "Ready to make it to Cali?" Rapunzel came out wearing her Ray-Bans and dancing. Jack laughed at her ridiculous display and smiled, and she did the hustle. "You know it. Let's go." He grabbed her bag and she grabbed her helmet. For a moment, she was happy it was just them again. Chapter 15. Rapunzel. Rapunzel sighed as she rested her head against Jack. She really wished Merida and Hiccup could have traveled with them somehow. She was sure they could have discovered a way they could have traveled. They were able to find Jack and her. Surely they could have figured out a way together. Jack was so stern and stubborn about them not coming. It was nice seeing them. It felt like normality for a while, like she got to experience a taste of home before it left again. She didn't realize how much she missed her home until now. She missed her mom. She missed how small the world seemed. She loves Jack. There is no denying that. But the world didn't seem so overwhelming and large from back home. She still wasn't even sure what she was going to say when she saw her real mother. She didn't even know what she looked like now. She really just wanted her mother to be overjoyed when she saw her. She wanted her to just pull her into a hug and apologize for ever giving her up. And she'd introduce Jack, and she knew her mother would love him. "I can feel you thinking," Jack shouted over the wind. "You need to relax." Rapunzel nodded and just hugged Jack tighter. She loved having someone that knew her. She never thought she would have fallen in love with this boy she hated for years. Looking back at it now, she thinks she always liked him. A part of her she couldn't admit to herself in the past, but she could now. And she thinks he felt the same way. A part of him always liked her too. Why else would he always be making jokes and flirting with her this past year? She could feel her butt and back starting to ache as they finally reached Arizona. It was warm, and her jacket she had on was making her heat up and sweat. She was itching to ask him if they could stop, but she was waiting for Jack to suggest it. She could keep going if he could. After another hour, Jack finally pulled off the road on an exit. She was relieved. He pulled into a diner, and Rapunzel practically melted when she stood. "That was the longest we've ever ridden before," Rapunzel moaned as she cracked her back. "Well, I wanted to get as far away as we could," Jack told her as he took his helmet off. "From home?" We're already pretty far away. Rapunzel laughed. I meant from Merida and Hiccup, Jack told her as they walked inside. Why would we need to get away from them quickly? Rapunzel asked him. I didn't want them following us, he told her as he led them to a table.
Rapunzel was confused. They were their friends. Why would Jack want to get away from this so quickly? But they're our best friends. Why would you be worried about them? Rapunzel carefully asked. Jack sighed and didn't look at her. Merida made you feel awful, and we don't have the funds to have 2 other people with us. Rapunzel pondered what he said. There was truth to his words, but she felt like there was another part he wasn't telling her. I'm gonna go to the bathroom to straighten myself up real quick. Jack got up and left her. Rapunzel leaned forward on her elbows and sighed. She felt the table buzz and realized Jack had left his phone and wallet on the table. She didn't think much of it as she reached across and grabbed his phone. She saw a text from his friend Guy, who she knew from school. She swiped the screen and felt her heart drop. Guy, so, since you've ran off with the princess, I've figured you won the bet, lol. Congrats, mate. Hope she's as good in bed as she is at being a bitch, lol. She heard Jack approach and vaguely saw him sit down across from her, but she couldn't bring herself to look up at him. She just kept staring at the words on the screen. Did someone call me? Jack asked her. She finally looked up at him and realized, and she didn't even know the person sitting across from her. No, but you got a text. She threw the phone at him and got up. She ran out of the diner and didn't know where to go. She heard Jack running after her and grab her arm, but she ripped it out of his grip. Was I a bet? Rapunzel turned to him, tears welling up. His face was blank, but there was regret in his eyes. He didn't answer her. Was I a fucking bet, Jack? She yelled at him again. Answer me. In the beginning. His voice broke. Yes, you were a bet. She felt like she was going to die of heartache and humiliation. She turned and sobbed. She was a bet. She was a possession. A prize to conquer. She couldn't be near him anymore. This was a mistake, she cried. No! He yelled and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. Don't say that. We love each other. It didn't start out that way. But we love each other, Rapunzel. Rapunzel didn't answer. She felt her heartbeat in her ears. Aren't we? He whispered. You need to go. She took his arms off her. What do you mean I need to go? We're in this together. I'm not going to just leave you here, Jack panicked. Rapunzel was quiet, refusing to look at him. I'm going to go to the bathroom. And then we're going home. Chapter 16. Jack. Jack paced back and forth frantically. He couldn't believe how stupid he was. He's ruined the only real good thing he had going for him. He should never had made that stupid bet. He should have just been real with her and told her the truth from the beginning, that he has always liked her and wanted her for himself. But he was too much of a coward and took the easy way out. He pretended to be this egotistical and pig-headed asshole, and now he's paying the price. He had no idea how he was going to make this up to her, but he had to. He wasn't going to lose her. Not after all they have been through. She was just upset. Once he explains himself and begs for her forgiveness, they will be fine. He just knows it. Love can overcome anything. Can it? He had been panicking for so long he didn't realize how much time had passed. He looked at his cell phone and realized it's been about 20 minutes since she had gone to the bathroom. She shouldn't be taking this long. He walked quickly back into the diner and towards the bathroom. With each step, his heart pounded in his chest. Something was wrong, and even though he kept telling himself that everything was fine, he knew he was wrong. He approached the women's restroom door and knocked softly. He listened closely and heard nothing. Fuck it. He opened the door and walked into 3 open stalls and no one in sight. He let out a small cry and looked around frantically. He ran his hand through his hair and looked across the bathroom to the semi-opened window. She had actually left him. She is gone. He ran outside to the other side of the building. There was some trucks lined up with the trailers connected, their drivers milling around but no long blonde hair in sight. Jack felt like he couldn't breathe, like the wind was knocked out of the lungs and he couldn't catch his breath. He could feel his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He couldn't just stand here. He needed to find her. He ran back into the diner. Excuse me, ma'am? He stopped the elderly waitress who was working there. Have you seen the girl I was with earlier? The blonde girl? She recalled. No, I'm sorry. I saw her head into the bathroom. Yeah, so did I. His voice cracked. She looked at him with uncertainty. Are you okay, hun? He didn't answer her at first. He didn't know what to do. He was hoping she would have seen something. Hun? She asked again, snapping him back to reality. What? He looked back at her. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for your time. He walked out and stopped at his motorcycle. He knew where she was going, and he knew she was still going there. He couldn't go home without her. He looked around the diner one last time for one last attempt to find her, but she was gone already. He put on his helmet and drove away. He was going to find her whether she wanted to see him or not. He needs her and she needs him too. He was sure of it. The night seemed to stretch on forever. His eyes were burning and his back was cramping up. But he couldn't stop. He should stop. Rapunzel would be asking to pull over and sleep somewhere right now, but she wasn't with him. And until she was again, he wasn't going to stop. He was in California now. He didn't know what town anymore. He only had one town on his mind, and he wasn't going to stop until he saw the road sign for it. He was going to find her even if it killed him. All he could do was try to think of ways she could be getting there. Hitchhiking with some truck driver that could do God knows what to her if he wanted to. It made him sick thinking about it. He was just praying that she was okay, that she was safe and okay. He looked onto the ever-stretching road in front of him and knew he could find her. He would never stop looking for her. Chapter 17. Rapunzel. Rapunzel looked out the window of the truck window she had gotten into, trying not to cry again. She felt a pain in her arm where she scraped it climbing out of the bathroom window. She remembered seeing Jack in the parking lot, crying, and her heart almost broke. She knew he grew to care for her, but she couldn't trust him anymore. The only reason she grew to trust him was because of a bet. He didn't have any intention of getting close to her until he could say he screwed the school's princess. And for that, she didn't think she could ever forgive him for. Without trust, there is nothing. Penny for your thoughts, she heard the man next to her say, and she sighed. My thoughts are too chaotic for me to know what I'm thinking, she replied, and looked ahead of her. Well, that's usually when you need to talk to someone the most, he told her. She looked at the man sitting next to her, and was grateful he hadn't been murdered, considering she was so upset she would have gotten into anyone's truck just to get away from Jack. I'm Sandy, by the way. He smiled at her, and she noted how warm it was. It was like being in the company of a grandfather, someone who made you feel warm and safe without needing a reason to. I'm Rapunzel, she muttered, still looking ahead. Rapunzel. What an interesting name. He thought it over. Your mother's idea, no doubt. Yeah, she nodded. Her mother. She would be seeing her tomorrow morning if all works out the way it should. She didn't know how she would be getting home, but no point in going back now when she was so close. Sandy left her alone with her thoughts again, and she turned to look out the window again. The darkness of the night seemed to go on forever. She hated to admit to herself, but she missed him. She wondered what he was going at this time. If he was looking for her, called the police about her missing, or just went home to tell others that he had won the bet, and she was nothing to him now. She would never forgive him, but he would always be tucked in the corner of her heart, and she hated him for that. She hated him for taking her to the top of that garage. She hated him for sticking up to Flynn for her when Flynn had hurt her. She hated him for coming over and making her feel better. She hated him for finding that damn picture that started this whole mess. She hated that he made her fall for him when she didn't want to. She hated him for all of this. But what she hated most was hating him because she knew she couldn't hate someone she loved. Wakey, wakey. Rapunzel felt someone nudging her awake. She blinked her eyes and got blinded by the sun. She moaned and stretched. She looked around and they were parked at a gas station. I'm sorry for drifting off. She looked over at Sandy, who waved it away. It's nothing, he told her. I'm used to these long hours. What time is it? She looked around. It was pretty bright out by now. It's about 8 right now, he told her. You feel asleep around 1. She nodded. She felt disoriented waking up without Jack with her. She frowned thinking of him. She felt tears pricking her eyes. So where are you going? He asked her. You can't travel with me forever. To this address. She handed him a piece of paper with her mother's address. He took it and uploaded it into his GPS. Oh, we are just about 45 minutes away. He smiled at her. Ready? She nodded quickly and leaned back in her seat. The closer they got to their destination, the more she could feel her heart beating in her throat. She didn't know if she could do this. She felt all alone in a world she didn't know where she belonged in. She thought she needed Jack for this, but now she didn't even know if she could do it by herself. What is going to happen from now on? She'll visit her mother? Will her mother want her to move out to be with her? Does she have a stepfather? Does she have any siblings? She was so lost in thought that 45 minutes had passed before she was even ready. She felt the truck slow down and looked at the massive white house in front of her. It had giant white pillars in front and a blue door in the front. This is your stop. Sandy smiled at her. Yeah, I guess it is. She looked at the house in awe. Are they expecting you? He asked her. She looked at him. Oh, yeah, thank you again, for everything. It was my pleasure. He smiled at her and shook her hand. You were great company. She was about to jump out of the truck when Sandy stopped her. Rapunzel? She turned to face him. I know you're dealing with something right now. And I know these people aren't expecting you. And I know you left that boy in the gas station back in Arizona. Just keep your chin up. And whatever that boy did to you, he looked awfully regretful. Why do you say that? She squinted her eyes at him. You don't know what he did. I saw him while you were inside. Your yelling caused a bit of attention. I saw him land on his knees when you ran inside and he was crying. People make mistakes, Rapunzel, and learn from them. That's just life. None of us are perfect. She looked into his deep hazel eyes that looked almost golden and nodded. Thank you, Sandy. Rapunzel smiled softly at him. He smiled back at her and she hopped out of his truck, shutting the door behind her. She watched him drive away and turned to face her mother's house. This was it. She traveled across the country to be here, and she didn't even know if she could do it. She needed him here. She needed his strength and his reassurance to get here through the door. But she didn't know where he was, or if they would ever even speak again. This was up to her. She walked up to the blue door and felt like she was going to be sick. She brought up a shaky fist and softly knocked on the door. She waited a second, but didn't hear anything. What if she wasn't home? Just as she was about to knock again, the door swung open. It was like she was looking in a mirror. Her mother was slightly taller than her, but the same golden wavy hair, same bright green round eyes, and same round face with pink cheeks. Rapunzel stammered. Rapunzel. Her mother stated matter-of-factly. Yes. Rapunzel nodded. Gothel contacted me and said you were coming, she told her. Rapunzel saw her mother look her over, and Rapunzel took the moment to do the same. Her mother was wearing a very fit tailored black suit jacket with a white button down underneath. She was wearing a black pencil skirt and stiletto shoes. She had a string of pearls around her neck, and Rapunzel noticed the rather large diamond rings on her ring finger. You look so much like I did at your age, her mother commented dreamily. She heard her mother sigh as she stared at Rapunzel blankly. Rapunzel squirmed underneath her mother's gaze and shuffled from one foot to the other awkwardly. Oh, Rapunzel's mother moved out of the doorway. Please, come in. You must be tired. Thank you. She nodded and walked into her house. She walked in to face a spiraling staircase with a chandelier in the middle of it. To the right was a dining room, and to the left was a sitting room. Please, have a seat. Her mother gestured her to a love-seat couch in the seating room. They walked into the room and sat across from each other. You have a lovely house. Rapunzel looked around the room and noticed the pictures on the mantel. She didn't see any children, but she saw a lot of pictures with her and another man. Is that my father? Rapunzel pointed at the pictures. She looked at the pictures. Oh no, that's my husband. Where's my father? She looked at her mother, who looked back at her with confusion. Didn't Gothel tell you? Her mother asked her. To which Rapunzel shook her head. Oh, Aurora looked slightly sad. He passed away years ago. Oh, Rapunzel looked down and could slightly feel tears prickling her eyes. She could never meet her father. What was his name? Were you two from where I live? Where is he buried? How did he die? Rapunzel spouted off. Whoa, her mother laughed. Slow down there. Well, I've been waiting for this moment for so long, Rapunzel told her mother. I always felt like I never belonged, and now I know why. What do you mean, don't belong? Aurora furrowed her eyebrows. You belong with Gothel. What do you mean? Rapunzel laughed sarcastically. You're my mother. I belong with you? Her mother's face fell slightly and she shook her head. No, Rapunzel. You belong with Gothel. That was the arrangement. You mean you don't want to know me? Rapunzel could feel blood rushing in her ears and her heart in her throat. I never wish bad things for you. I wonder about you every now and then, but we have our own life, darling. Aurora explained to Rapunzel calmly. Does your husband know I exist? Rapunzel asked her mother angrily. Rapunzel watched her mother sigh and look at Rapunzel with sad eyes. She knew the answer. Well, Rapunzel got up suddenly. It seems I've got all my answers. Thank you for your time. Rapunzel made for the door, but her mother stopped her. Rapunzel, wait! Let me at least buy you a plane ride home or something, her mother offered. Desperate to get rid of me again so quickly? Rapunzel snapped back. No, it's just, you belong there, and I belong here, her mother explained. This whole trip was a waste of my time. Rapunzel grabbed her bag. She was about to walk out of the door when she turned around to face her mother one last time. This whole trip was a huge mistake. I should have never listened to Jack. I should have never looked for you. Who's Jack? Her mother asked, tilting her head to the side. Rapunzel teared up and looked away. She sucked in a deep breath and turned to her mother. He was the person I trusted most in the world. I loved him, but everyone you love betrays you someday, right? Because some people are incapable of being loved. Everyone I think loves me ends up leaving me eventually. There is no one I can trust in this world. Goodbye, Mother. Rapunzel opened the door and slammed it behind her. She knew her mother wasn't coming after her. She knew she would never get the relationship she wanted so dearly with her. This was a mistake. She walked down the driveway, brushing away tears, not knowing what to do now. She looked up towards the road and saw him. He was leaning against his motorcycle, his arms crossed in front of him. His hair was blowing around in the wind. She walked towards him, and he started to walk towards her. She could tell his eyes were red and his face had scruff on it. She started to pick up her pace until she was running at him and he was running towards her. They collided into each other, wrapping their arms tightly around the other. Rapunzel finally let her sobs out and could feel Jack shaking from crying too. I'm so sorry, Puns, he muttered into her hair. I'm so sorry. Me too, Rapunzel cried into his chest. I missed you so much. He pulled her away and looked into her eyes. She could see how sad his eyes were, and her heart broke for him. You scared me so much, he cried. I thought I'd never see you again. I was about to run into the house to see if you were here, but I saw you running out. She doesn't want me. Rapunzel shook her head and cried. She doesn't want me. She doesn't want anything to do with me. It's her loss, Puns. He wiped away her tears. She doesn't deserve you. I don't deserve you. I don't know how I'll ever get you to forgive me, but I will spend an eternity making it up to you. Can you do something for me? Rapunzel begged. Yes, anything. He kissed away her tears and hugged her again. Take me home. Chapter 18. Jack. Jack couldn't help but smile to himself as they drove past the California state line sign and into Arizona. Jack stared at the empty road in front of him. The night sky stretched over them. Rapunzel hadn't spoken to him since they had ridden away from her mother's house, but he didn't mind. He was grateful to have her arms wrapped around his midsection and her head resting against his back. He had never been so scared than looking for her. He didn't know if he would have been able to find where her mother's house is. All he remembered was the street name and the town. He was driving up and down the road when he saw a girl with long blonde hair enter a house, and the door shut behind her. He didn't know what was going to happen with her mother and her in the house. While he was outside contemplating whether or not to knock on the door, he saw Rapunzel run from the house crying, and his heart broke for her. He could only imagine how horrible it went for her. He didn't know how their future is going to go now. They're going home, but obviously some things won't be the same. Their friends, besides Merida and Hiccup, haven't known what's been going on since they left. They've missed at least 2 weeks' worth of schoolwork they'd have to catch up on. And not only that, Rapunzel has her cheerleading team to worry about. He was hoping that they hadn't replaced her, and she could still be on it. There was a lot of things he didn't know, but the one thing he did know was how happy he was to be in her life. He would do anything to make her forgive him and understand how he had grown to love her. I'm tired, he heard her mutter behind him. It was the first thing she had said all day. All right, let's find somewhere, he told her, and pulled off the next exit for a motel that was advertised. He pulled into the motel, and they quickly jumped off his bike. He wrapped the tarp around it and grabbed their bags. Ready? He extended his hand. She nodded her head yes, but walked past him and his hand. He frowned, watching her walk towards the main office, and followed her. Hi. Jack approached the front desk. We'd like a room, please. $50 a night. The man behind the desk flipped through a magazine, not looking up at them. That's fine. Jack got his ID and card out and left it on the counter. Here. The man took the card and swiped it, not looking up at Jack. He swiped 2 room cards for them and passed them the 3 cards back. Room 70, enjoy. The guy muttered and went back to his magazine. Thanks. Jack mumbled and grabbed all the cards off the desk. He turned to Rapunzel. Come on. They walked into their room. It was basic with just a full-size bed, a TV, and a chair in the corner. Not as nice as Texas, huh? Jack joked, trying to make it less tense between them. It's fine. Rapunzel opened her bag and got out her toiletries and pajamas. I'll be in the bathroom. Jack nodded as Rapunzel shut herself in the bathroom. He went over to the phone and quickly punched in Hiccup's number. Hello? He heard Hiccup ask. Hey, Jack answered. Oh, it's you. Look, I'm sorry about the other day. You have to understand the reasons why, though, Jack explained. I could have understood better if you two didn't just ditch us, Hiccup responded. I'm sick of you just disappearing. Well, it won't be happening anymore because we're on our way home. Jack ran his hand through his hair. What, seriously? So soon? Did Rapunzel find her mother? Yeah, she did, but it didn't go well, Jack explained. Oh, what happened? Hiccup asked sadly. I don't know. Rapunzel isn't really talking to me right now. Jack sighed. Why not? The other day you two couldn't keep your hands off of each other. Hiccup snickered. Because she found out about that stupid bet I made with Guy. I knew that bet wasn't going to end well. Hiccup recalled the day it was made. I would appreciate it if you didn't gloat about being right. Jack frowned. What do I do? It was a mistake, Hiccup. I did it because I was just being stupid. I didn't expect I would fall in love with her. Tell her that. I did, Jack yelled out. But she isn't listening to me, and I don't blame her. She trusted me, and I betrayed it. She thinks the only reason why I got close to her was for a bet, not because I'm in love with her. I don't know how to help you out, to be honest. I've never been in a situation like this, but you always figure out what do. I have faith in you, Hiccup told him. Thanks, Jack mumbled. I'll see you in a few days. Travel safe, Hiccup told him, and they hung up. It felt nice to talk to his friend, but it didn't really help him, however. But Hiccup was right. He'll figure out how to fix it. He heard the bathroom door open while he was in the middle of his thought, and he looked up to see Rapunzel. Hey. He stood up and briefly smiled at her. You look refreshed. He rolled his eyes at himself and sighed. Thanks. Rapunzel mumbled and sat on the bed, grabbing the TV remote. I guess it's my turn. Jack grabbed his stuff and walked into the bathroom, glancing at her before shutting the door behind him. The silence was killing him, and he could tell it was bothering her too. They had only been sitting next to each other for 30 minutes, and they were agonizing. Jack decided to just go for it. What happened with your mother? Jack asked. I don't want to talk about it, Rapunzel replied grimly, staring at the TV. Why not? Jack tried. Because, Rapunzel huffed impatiently. I don't like you right now, and I just don't want to talk about it. Why don't you like me right now? He asked, even though he knew the answer. She finally turned to look at him, and he frowned at how red and swollen her eyes were. Because you broke my heart, she told him, and turned back to the TV. He hated how indifferent she was being. I didn't break your heart, he told her, refusing to look away. I'm right here, ready to be with you and listen to everything, ready to do anything you need me to do to have you forgive me for a stupid thing I did before I even got to know you. I don't know if I could ever believe in anything you say ever again. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes. Why? He begged. Because you could have just been getting me to fall for you so you could win a bet. How do I know you really care for me? She countered. Because I brought you across the U.S. Because I left my life behind to help you with something that I know you needed to do. Because I will always put myself in the way of danger to keep you safe. I will do everything I can to make you realize all of this, Puns. You don't need to forgive me now. You don't need to forgive me tomorrow, or next week, or next year. But I am going to try every day to make you forgive me and believe me, he told her, smiling. She didn't respond to him, just looked at him, tears quietly going down her cheek. I love you, Puns. I have since I first saw you when you moved in. I loved you when I would make fun of you in chemistry and when I punched out Flynn for hurting you. When you got wasted and fell asleep on my chest. I love you now, even if you don't love me back. Jack continued to explain to her. And I'm sorry I made a stupid bet with a stupid friend for a stupid reward. You deserve more than that, and I want to be the person to give you everything you deserve. I will never force you to do something you're not ready for or don't want to do. I will always listen to you, and I promise I will do my best to never intentionally hurt you. So that's all I have to say. Jack shrugged and looked away. I don't know how else to tell you. I love you right now. I just hope you forgive me and continue to want to be with me as much as I want to be with you. I love you too. He heard her whimper beside him, and he looked at her with wide eyes. I'm sorry? He asked her. Say that again? I love you too, Jack. Rapunzel looked at him. But I feel so conflicted right now. I believe you, but I feel so much pain right now. Because of me? He asked. She shook her head. No, she didn't want me, Jack. She started to cry openly. She doesn't want me. I asked her if we could have some type of relationship, and she told me no. Her husband doesn't even know about me. Oh, puns. Jack reached over and pulled her into his lap to hold her. Why doesn't she want me, Jack? She cried, looking at him. Because she's the dumbest person in the world who doesn't realize what an amazing person she is giving up on, he told her, tears falling from his eyes now. It is her loss, Rapunzel. She is losing out on one, if not the best person she could have ever had in her life. Don't ever blame yourself or question yourself because her decisions. You have achieved so much without her. You ace all your classes, you have your cheerleading, everyone loves you, you have friends who would do anything for you, and you have me, and no one is a bigger fan of you than I am. I just want to go home and see my mom. Rapunzel cried into his chest. I know, love. He put his head against hers. We'll be home soon, and then you'll be wrapped up in your life again. You'll be there, right? She whimpered into him. Always. Chapter 19. The End. Rapunzel was starting to recognize their surroundings as they got closer to home. All she wanted was to go home, and now that she was so close, she didn't know how she should feel about it. She was scared, nervous, disappointed in herself. And what happened? The only good thing that came out of this trip was her relationship with Jack. Yes, he had hurt her. Yes, she hadn't totally forgiven him. But she knew he meant all he had said the other day. She knew he wasn't ever the type of person who would ever lie about the things he said just to get a quick lay. She still couldn't really comprehend what happened with her mother. She wasn't sure why she was so disappointed in herself. She didn't do anything wrong, right? It's not her fault her mother doesn't want her, and she knew that deep down, but it still didn't make it hurt any less. She must have imagined dozens of ways meeting her mother would go, but she didn't expect it to be nothing. Maybe she was so disappointed in herself because she let herself hope for something, and she never expected it to go badly. Maybe this was a life lesson for her, that you shouldn't always expect a happy ending with everything. But she was sure she'd have one with Jack. Nervous? She heard Jack shout to her, and she nodded her head quickly. Me too, he told her. She looked at their hometown as they passed their school. Students were milling around, and some looked at them. She wondered if they recognized them. She knew it was going to be talk of the town when they came back. No doubt every student went home and told their parents about what happened. It's going to be terrible shutting out all the rumors, but she knew none of them mattered anymore. Not as long as she had her friends and Jack. She could get through anything. Rapunzel looked up at her house and sighed. She was nervous as hell, but she was so excited to be back in her room. This is it, she sighed and turned to Jack. End of the line. We're finally home. He looked at his house and then back at her. What happens if tomorrow we aren't the same? We will be. Rapunzel smiled. Why wouldn't we be? I don't know. Jack sighed and ran a hang through his hair. Because we're going to be back to our normal lives and it makes me nervous. I'm used to it just being us now. It's going to be weird not waking up to you every morning now. Well, maybe next year that'll change, she smiled at him. When we graduate, who knows what the future will bring? You'll wake up next to me someday. He beamed a smile at her that made her go weak in the knees, and she was forever grateful that he loved her. I guess it's time to face our parents, Rapunzel told him. One last hug. He quickly embraced her and gave her a kiss to say goodbye. I'll call you tonight, okay? He told her, backing away. She nodded and watched Jack walk into his house. She turned to her own and started to slowly walk towards the door. She eased the door open and didn't hear anything coming from inside. She walked in and quietly shut the door behind her. She inhaled a deep breath and called out, Mom? She heard a cup shatter as running footsteps came from the back of the house. Her mother stood at the end of the hall with wide eyes looking at Rapunzel. Hi, Mom. Rapunzel waved, and before she could even say another word, Gothel had embraced her in a hug. "Rapunzel!" Gothel cried into her hair. "I've missed you so much!" She pulled Rapunzel away from her and held her face. "Are you okay, baby? Is everything all right? Where's Jack? Is he all right?" "Yes, yes, and yes. He's home right now," Rapunzel told her. She could feel her nervousness and her anxiety melting away as Gothel hugged her tightly and kept telling how much she missed her. This is where she belonged, with her real mother. Just because Gothel didn't give birth to her doesn't mean she isn't her mother. She was there to take care of Rapunzel growing up. Gothel was there for when she got hurt, for when she was too scared to sleep alone at night. A parent is someone who chooses to love and raise when they didn't have to. "I'm so sorry." Rapunzel started to cry and hugged her mother tightly. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I just left and made you scared. I'm sorry for not telling you how I felt and not considering your feelings." "No, I'm sorry, Rapunzel." Gothel looked at her. "I should have told you the truth a long time ago. I'm sorry for yelling at you on the phone when you called me. I should have understood what you needed to do and gone with you instead of you resorting to sneaking away. She called me after you left," Gothel told Rapunzel. Rapunzel looked at her mother with confusion. "She did? What did she say?" "She told me that you were safe and had reached her, that you had left with a boy with white hair on his motorcycle. She said to tell you she is sorry for making you so upset and that she never meant to hurt," Gothel told her. Rapunzel listened, soaking up everything Gothel was telling her. Why didn't she want me, Mom?" Rapunzel asked her, tears still in her eyes. "She never really told me a reason, sweetie." Gothel shrugged and smiled at her daughter. "But to be honest, I'm so happy. I have loved you from the first time I saw you, Rapunzel. I knew you were meant to be mine, and I can't have kids. I found out at a young age. And when I saw you, I knew I wanted you forever. I am forever your mother. I will always want you, Rapunzel. Do not ever feel like you are alone in this world." Rapunzel smiled at the photo booth photos of her and Jack taken at the zoo when their trip first started. She had spent the rest of the night telling her mother about their trip, leaving out some of the heated details and the fact that she ditched Jack and his stupid bet he made forever ago. The highlights, if you will. She heard her phone ring, and she quickly grabbed it. "Hello?" she asked anxiously. "You sound excited." She heard a low chuckle on the other line, and she smiled to herself. She had already missed him so much. "How did it go?" she asked him, flopping back onto her bed. "Better than I expected," he told her. "They're mostly peeved at all the homework I'm going to have to catch up on." "Same," she nodded in agreement. "Does Gothel hate me?" Jack asked nervously. "No," Rapunzel laughed. "She actually thinks you taking me to the zoo and to tourist things were nice, and she said she understands why I did what I did. She's actually not that mad at all, to be honest." "Wow, I don't know if I was expecting that," he laughed a little. "Same," she smiled, "but I'll take it." "So, school tomorrow," he sighed.
I know, she rolled her eyes. My mother is already making me go back tomorrow. You think she'd want to spend time with me, but nope, nervous. Even more than I was today. Rapunzel laughed. But I don't really care anymore. I just want to pass high school and leave it all behind. We got this. She could hear Jack smile. I'm going to get ready for tomorrow. I'll pick you up for school, okay? All right. She nodded. I love you, Jack. I love you too, Puns. He chuckled lightly and hung up. People are definitely going to tell I rubbed off on you. Jack snicked to himself as he parked his bike in a parking spot at school. Rapunzel hopped off of it and took off her helmet. She was wearing skinny jeans, a pair of black combat boots, a white V-neck t-shirt, and a black jacket, her hair unruly and natural. She decided to also wear her makeup a little darker than she used to at school, but she didn't care anymore. Yeah, that's the point, Rapunzel told him. I'm not the same girl I was when we first left. I'm not the same person I was before I got to know you. This is me now, and it makes me happy. Makes me happy too. He smiled at her and wrapped an arm around her. Ready? I was born ready. She stuck her tongue out at him and he laughed. As they walked into school together, their hands entwined together, the whispers started immediately. Is that who I think it is? When did they come back? Are they together now? She looks different. I heard she got knocked up. He's a drug addict. This is fun. Jack sighed and shot a few people some dirty looks. Rapunzel laughed at him. Rapunzel! She heard her name shouted from the other end of the hallway. She saw a red frizzball come bounding towards her. Merida collided into her so fast for a hug, she ripped Rapunzel's hand out of Jack's and sent them backwards. Jesus, Merida, oh, my shoulder, Jack winced. Rapunzel laughed as she hugged Merida back as they laid on the ground. I'm so sorry. Merida hugged her best friend and cried. I should have never been so mean to you. I should have never just ditched you. Rapunzel apologized back. I've missed you. Jack! They heard and saw Hiccup walking up to them smiling. Hey, man! Jack smiled, and Rapunzel watched as they hugged each other. Oh my God! Is that Rapunzel? She looked up and saw her friend Heather smiling at her. She quickly stood up and hugged her friend she'd known since freshman year. Hey, Heather! Rapunzel smiled and hugged her friend. Where have you been? Heather asked, catching almost everyone's attention in the hallway. Jack and I went to visit my aunt in California. She smiled at Heather. Oh my God, that's awesome! I've always wanted to go there. Heather smiled. Yeah, it was amazing. We did it as a road trip on Jack's motorcycle, so we saw all these different sights, Rapunzel explained. I know it was out of nowhere, but you're only young once.
Several people laughed who had been listening to the story. She looked up as she felt Jack's arms snake around her and smile. He knew he was pleased that everyone was eating up this story. She knew it would go through the school like wildfire, and by the end of the day, everyone would know that was the reason why they were gone. Just some vacation that two young kids took. Well, I'll see you later at practice, right? Heather asked Rapunzel. Yeah, totally. Rapunzel nodded enthusiastically. Rapunzel smiled as Heather walked away from them. I'm still on the cheerleading team. Rapunzel squealed with excitement and Jack hugged her. I'm so happy for you. Jack smiled and leaned down and whispered in her ear, Quick thinking, babe, with the whole vacation thing. Rapunzel looked at Jack and smiled. She couldn't figure out why she was so nervous and scared. Everything was just fine as Jack told her it would be. With him, everything would always work out for the best. I love you, Jack. She smiled at him. He beamed right back at her. I love you too, Rapunzel.